Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Awakened a Godlike Quirk? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. As dawn stretched its pale fingers over the sleepy town of Mizudafu, rain swept its gentle tune across the shivering pavement. Izuku Midoriya walked alone, footsteps sinking into the subdued symphony of early morning. His soggy sneakers slapped against the puddles. Surrounding him, the suburban backdrop murmured under the caress of a cool breeze, coursing the scent of wet earth mixed with asphalt. This scent was almost a balm to Izuku's senses, a familiar melancholy he wore like a second skin. With each step, Izuku felt the oppressive weight of anticipation. It wasn't the hopeful kind that buzzed in the veins before something eagerly awaited, but the dense, dread-heavy kind that pulled at the corners of his very being. His school, only a few blocks away, wasn't just a place of learning but a place of torment where he was tested and harassed daily not by exams, but by sneers and snickers that sliced sharper than glass, and the persistent bullying from his peers. Izuku gritted his teeth as he tried his best to ignore the whispers and the teasing, walking through the halls of Aldra Junior High, his head held low as he tried to remain outside of conflict. He gripped his backpack tighter, each finger tensing around the strap as if to strangle his own anxious thoughts. The bag, packed with notebooks filled with hero analysis, symbolized his fierce, almost defiant desire to belong to a world that seemed determined to edge him out. These notebooks were Izuku's secret armor, pages dense with strategies and contingency plans, all penned by a boy who had never manifested a quirk. They were his escape from reality, something to distract him from the struggles of his daily life. He knew that writing them wouldn't help him become a hero, but it was nice to dream, right? Even before he set foot in the classroom, Izuku could feel the atmosphere shift, the air thickening with whispered barbs and potent disdain. Eyes pinned him down, beetle-black and unflinching, as he shuffled towards his seat. The room was charged with a silent, electric malevolence that seemed particularly focused on him, an invisible spotlight highlighting his isolation. Hushed whispers and silent laughs filled Izuku's ears, a reminder that even his classmates who were deemed weak by those with powerful quirks saw him as nothing but a useless freak. Izuku sighed as he put his head on his desk, silently wishing this day would end already. He thought about his mother, how stressed she's been, probably because of him coming home covered in bruises, burn marks and bandages, but Izuku always had an excuse to not make his mother worry. Izuku was snapped out of his thoughts as an explosive palm slammed onto his desk, scorching the wood and adding to the already prominent scorch marks on the desk. Izuku jumped as the palm landed on his desk, as he shakily looked up at Katsuki Bakugo, someone who he once considered his best friend. That was long gone, however, and Katsuki took every opportunity to remind him of that fact, and that he was a quirkless freak. Katsuki Bakugo, a whirlwind of raw power and smirking superiority, was the head of Izuku's torment. His quirk was as explosive as his temper, a stark contrast to Izuku's hidden, unawakened potential. Deku, the useless quirkless wannabe, Bakugo would sneer, weaponizing Izuku's own name into a taunt, into a reminder of his deficiency. Each laugh, each jeer that echoed off the walls, felt like a physical blow, stripping pieces of Izuku's hope and replacing them with mounting despair. "What's on your mind, nerd? Care to share it with an old friend?" Katsuki hissed, his palms cracking as if telling Izuku to spill. Izuku frankly wasn't in the mood, as the fear in his eyes turned into a deadpanned and bored expression as he spoke. "Nothing, Kakin, I'm just tired." Katsuki clearly wasn't happy with that answer, nor the look on Izuku's face, a tick mark forming on his forehead as he snarled, before throwing an explosive fist straight into Izuku's face, sending the quirkless boy flying out of his seat and into the back wall of the classroom, blood dripping down the back of his head and from his mouth, as he groaned, barely hanging on to consciousness as the classroom erupted into laughter, Katsuki Bakugo grinning as he spoke. Orwell yelled, "That's for looking down on me, nerd. You think you can be smug and just get away with it? Think again." Katsuki shouted before Izuku blacked out. Many hours pass, the school day continuing without Izuku. Izuku grunted as he woke up in the nurse's office, his injuries barely even covered as the nurse, who saw Izuku as less than human, like everyone else. She paid him no mind as Izuku slowly got up and walked out of the nurse's room without a word. With his teeth gritted, he silently cursed Katsuki and his lackeys, even his classmates and teachers. He still didn't understand why he was treated this way. He was still human, but those with quirks saw him as otherwise, like an inferior race. Izuku didn't even bother returning to class. He refused to deal with any more of the harassment. In his heart, Izuku harbored visions of heroism, vibrant and vivid. Yet each day, these dreams were mocked by his stark reality, the unyielding truth of his quirklessness feeling like chains around his spirit. It was a constant, exhausting battle to keep his dreams alive in the face of relentless belittlement. He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose before he walked out of the school's front gate, making his way home, slowly but surely. He decided to take a shortcut, giving him time to bury himself in his thoughts. He thought back to the day before, the vivid memory of Katsuki Bakugo blowing up one of his journals, a journal he poured his soul into. His mind wandered to what Katsuki said, "Just pray to born with a quirk in your next life. Go take a swan dive off the roof of the building." Izuku grimaced, his brow furrowing as he clenched his jaw, thinking to himself, "That idiot. What if I really jumped? What would he do then?" Izuku thought, fighting back tears, as he didn't notice the gelatinous blob of slime forming behind him, the sludge villain grinning with his crooked yellow teeth. A medium-sized skin suit. "You'll make a perfect skin suit for me to hide in, kid." Izuku, hearing the sludge villain's words, turned around, eyes wide. Izuku's chest tightened. His mind screamed warnings, panic flaring like a wildfire in his veins. He tried to turn, to run, but the villain was faster, fluid, alive, wrapping around his body, cold and suffocating. He clawed at the slime, fingers slipping through it like trying to grasp smoke. Every movement seemed to slow, the villain's grip tightening, a weight pressing on his chest that made breathing a desperate effort. Izuku chocked and clawed at the slime, eyes wide with fear, as he struggled and fought to escape the villain's hold. But, Izuku thought, terror coiling in his stomach. "I can't die here. I can't." Izuku's thoughts raced, as he continued to try and escaped the villain's hold. The sludge villain chuckled darkly, his words, his voice, sounding like gurgling mud in the back of his throat. "Don't worry, I'm just taking over your body. It'll be easier for both of us if you don't fight back." His words made Izuku only struggle harder, much to the villain's amusement. "Thanks for the help, kid. You're a real hero to me." The villain said mockingly, Izuku's vision blurred, the world around him bending in the edges, sounds warping into distant echoes. He could feel the sludge pressing into him, trying to crawl inside, merging with him. And then, a strange sensation surged, a heat, a pulse, an almost electric hum coursing through his body. The fear and desperation, the years of oppression and ridicule, seemed to awaken something buried deep within him, before Izuku went limp. The sludge villain grinned as he began to force himself into the kid's body, not noticing as a purple and blue glow of energy began to flood Izuku's veins, his body rapidly producing antimatter. All Might jumped out of the sewer, watching as the last of the sludge villain entered Izuku's body. All Might's brow furrowed as he clenched his teeth, preparing to force the sludge villain out of Izuku if needed. All Might, leaping to action, froze in midair, eyes widening as he watched the young boy twist in pain and power, a barrier of transparent purple energy erupting outward, throwing All Might into a wall. The ground itself seemed to resist, cracking, floating, and twisting as the laws of reality bent to Izuku's awakening quirk. Buildings trembled, lampposts glitched in midair, puddles suspended like molten glass. The sludge villain's gurgling laugh faltered, replaced by a strangled scream as Izuku's body convulsed violently. Inside the purple dome, Izuku's consciousness flickered. Pain and fear coalesced into something raw, primal, and unstoppable. His eyes opened, glowing purple, the whites of his eyes, his scara, black irises burning like molten amethyst as they glowed a vibrant purple. His hair lifted, strands curling and floating as if in zero gravity, flames of radiant violet liking the air. He didn't think, he acted. Matter disintegrated under his touch, the sludge villain screaming as chunks of its body were ripped apart from within. The slime that made up the sludge villain and distorted remnants flew in chaotic arcs, yet Izuku's body moved with precision, almost as if the quirk itself was guiding him. Each pulse of antimatter tore the villain apart, reshaping the battlefield into a surreal nightmare of floating debris and warped air. All Might's jaw clenched. He had seen heroes born, seen quirks awakened, but nothing like this. This was beyond comprehension. A boy, long considered quirkless, wielding power that could rival some of the most dangerous villains. And yet he was still unconscious, still a child. The weight of potential and peril settled heavily on the veteran hero's shoulders. The screams of the sludge villain continued, as Izuku slowly sat up, looking at his hands, before gasping as he coughed out the eyeball and teeth of the sludge villain, as well as a few globs of the sludge villain continuing to writhe in pain. The sludge villain had lost a lot of his mass, as Izuku's body destroyed almost all of the sludge villain's body. Izuku had awakened a quirk, one that was dormant, one that he didn't even know he had. His quirk had altered his body in an instant when he died, antimatter flowing through his veins, altering his very biology and body's chemistry. He sat up with some struggle again, ignoring the writhing villain, Izuku looking at the glowing purple and blue veins on his arms as they pulsed with energy. What is this? Is this a quirk? Izuku thought, his mind racing 1,000 miles per hour. The antimatter had destroyed the sludge villain's body, reacting with the very matter that made his body, which would explain the screaming. Izuku's body distorted and glitched a bit, his left arm seeming to disappear, before glitching back into existence. The purple dome fell, as Izuku's hair stopped floating and glowing but remained purple, his quirk deactivating before he collapsed, fading as his body gave out, exhausted due to the late quirk awakening. All Might immediately took the opportunity to put what was left of the sludge villain in a bottle before he picked Izuku up, clenching his teeth, as he mentally cursed himself for allowing a kid to be injured like this, but he also wondered what he had just witnessed. All Might put those thoughts in the back of his head for now, as he jumped into the sky, landing atop a building as he began rushing to a hospital. A few days passed, the city outside Izuku's hospital window moving as usual, oblivious to the upheaval in the life of one small boy. Inko Midoriya had barely left her son's side, sitting in a stiff chair that had begun to crease uncomfortably beneath her. Her hands were folded tightly on her lap, knuckles white, eyes trained on Izuku's pale, bandaged form. Every subtle twitch, every shallow breath made her heart pound. She hadn't slept properly, hadn't eaten much, yet the thought of leaving him even for a minute was unbearable. Her motherly instincts had amplified to a constant, painful vigilance, her very being tethered to his recovery. She had refused on multiple occasions to go home. She didn't want to leave her only child's side. The soft hum of the hospital machines filled the otherwise silent room, rhythmic and almost soothing. Inko's gaze followed each subtle movement. Izuku's fingers twitched against the white sheets. A shallow breath escaped his lips, and his eyelids fluttered. She leaned forward slightly, as though even the tiniest gesture might remind him she was there, waiting, watching, protecting. A groan, low and strained, broke the tense quiet. Inko's eyes widened as she snapped her gaze to Izuku's face. His eyelids cracked open slowly, revealing irises glowing faintly violet, a sight so surreal it made her recoil instinctively for a heartbeat. Then, without thinking, she sprang forward, pulling him into her arms. "My baby," she cried, her voice tearing through the room like a hurricane. Tears streamed freely down her face as she clutched him tightly, burying her face into his bandaged shoulder. Izuku groaned in pain, the sharp sting shooting through his battered body, but he returned the hug instinctively, ignoring every ache, every broken rib, every bruise. His body was racked, but his heart surged in the warmth of his mother's embrace. His body ached in pain from both the awakening of his quirk, which altered every aspect of his body, down to the very DNA of his body. "Mom?" His voice was hoarse, a whisper more than a word, caught between pain, disbelief, and a fragile hope he hadn't allowed himself in years. Hearing the tone in Izuku's voice made Inko's heart ache, her tears threatening to spill yet again. "Shoo, it's okay, sweetie, it's okay." Inko's words were soft, trembling as she gently pressed her hands to his back, stroking soothing circles over the bandages. She pulled back slightly to look at his face, the glow in his eyes reflecting a mixture of wonder, fear, and exhaustion. Izuku's own gaze dropped to his palms, noticing small, perfectly round holes at the center of each, faintly glowing with the same purple energy that ran like rivers beneath his skin. His breath hitched, tears stinging his eyes as he whispered, voice cracking under the weight of revelation and awe. "You'll finally awaken a quirk?" Inko's own tears fell freely now, tracing warm tracks down her cheeks. She reached up, cupping his face gently in her hands, forcing him to meet her gaze. Her voice shook, but it carried an almost feral pride beneath the worry. "Worry about that later, sweetie. But yes, you did. I'm so happy for you." Izuku's heart raced, chest tightening with disbelief. His vision blurred slightly as tears mingled with the faint hospital light. He struggled to speak, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on him. His hands trembled, the glow pulsing faintly, a reminder that his body now held something extraordinary, something dangerous and yet, something magnificent. Inko pressed the button beside the bed, summoning a doctor. Moments later, a figure rushed in white coat flaring, hands ready to stabilize, check vitals, and administer care. Behind them, almost imperceptibly at first, a shadow appeared in the doorway. Izuku's eyes widened so violently it was almost comical, the fatigue forgotten, replaced by sudden recognition and awe. "All Might." Izuku stammered, his voice trembling, barely audible over the rhythmic beeping of the hospital machines. His glowing irises widened even further, the soft purple light reflecting in the sterile fluorescent lights above, making the air between them feel almost electric. Every fiber of his being was alert, chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow breaths, mind racing 1,000 miles per hour. He could barely process what he was seeing: a man larger than life, standing there with a presence so commanding it made the room seem smaller, the walls closing in with the weight of his aura. All Might's towering frame, shoulders broad and chest heaving with restrained energy, softened slightly as he took a step closer to the bedside. His eyes, usually so brimming with confidence and unshakable power, flickered with something more human: concern, guilt, and awe. "Young Midoriya," he said, his voice low and steady, yet carrying a resonance that seemed to vibrate through Izuku's very chest. Each word held weight, the kind that left no room for pretense. Izuku's heart pounded, a mixture of fear, disbelief, and the faint spark of hope igniting in the pit of his stomach. His hands trembled on the sheets, the faint purple glow still coursing through his veins, a reminder that the world had changed in the span of a few impossible moments. He wanted to speak, to ask 100 questions at once, yet his throat felt dry and tight, his mind a whirlwind of images from the battle, the sludge villain, and the terrifying awakening of his quirk. All Might's expression softened even further, and almost impossibly, he dropped to one knee beside the hospital bed, bringing himself closer to Izuku's level. The act itself, of the symbol of peace bowing before a child, sent a jolt through Izuku's chest, half shock, half awe, all disbelief. All Might's deep, familiar chuckle echoed gently in the room, a sound that was usually larger than life but now carried the weight of solemnity. "Young man," All Might said, bowing his head in a gesture so sincere it seemed to carry years of regret and responsibility, "please forgive me for allowing harm to come your way. If I had been faster, if I had arrived just a moment sooner, I could have stopped that villain from nearly taking your life." His voice wavered ever so slightly, the first hint of human vulnerability Izuku had ever heard from the hero. Izuku's chest tightened, a mixture of awe, guilt, and relief swirling in his stomach. He swallowed hard, forcing the lump in his throat down, clenching his teeth as he tried to process both the gravity of All Might's apology and the impossibility of the quirk that now pulsed through him. His voice came out strained, hoarse, barely above a whisper, yet filled with honesty and warmth. "All Might, don't apologize. It wasn't your fault. All Might's eyes softened further, his usual heroic composure giving way to something almost tender. He reached a hand forward, placing it gently over Izuku's, the gesture grounding and real, connecting the boy to the hero he had idolized for so long. "You're too kind, young Midoriya," he said quietly. "But understand this, what you just endured, what you survived, that power of yours, it's extraordinary. And yet you remained brave, selfless. That is what makes you a hero, not just the quirk flowing through your veins." All Might said, silently considering Izuku to be his successor, based on both the power he holds and the selflessness he just showed. "This boy. He has the heart of a hero," All Might thought to himself. Izuku's lips trembled, the weight of All Might's words pressing on him like a tidal wave. The glowing veins on his arms pulsed faintly as if responding to the emotion in the room, the residual energy from his awakening quirk humming softly. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel something beyond fear or pain, pride, relief, and an almost dizzying realization that his life had irrevocably changed. Inko Midoriya's fingers fidgeted lightly in her lap as she smiled gently to herself, relief washing over her like warm sunlight breaking through a stormy sky. After days of sitting vigil beside her son, seeing him finally awake, even if still fragile, filled her chest with a mixture of joy and lingering fear. She began conversing with the doctor in calm, measured tones, providing every detail of Izuku's awakening, the glow in his eyes, the way his veins had pulsed with violet and blue energy, the strange and terrifying power that had ripped through the sludge villain, the latter half of the info she had received from All Might. Her words were careful, precise, almost reverent, as if she were documenting a miracle. The doctor listened intently, nodding as he adjusted his clipboard and prepared the instruments on a nearby tray. His movements were professional, but the slight narrowing of his eyes betrayed a cautious curiosity. He selected a syringe from its sterile packaging, a special model designed specifically for drawing blood from subjects with unknown or potentially dangerous quirks, a precaution rarely necessary, but essential in a case like Izuku's. The metallic tray glimmered under the hospital lights, each tool meticulously aligned, reflecting the quiet tension that had filled the room. "Miss Midoriya," the doctor began, his voice calm, precise, yet tinged with cautious respect. "Do I have your consent to run a quirk examination on your son? It's a routine procedure in cases like this, though given the nature of the quirk, extra precautions are necessary." He gently placed the syringe beside the bed, still in its packaging, a small shield against the unknown waiting for them. Inko's gaze drifted to her son, who lay propped slightly upright by the hospital pillows. His purple glowing veins pulsed faintly, remnants of the recent quirk awakening, and his gaze flitted between the syringe, the doctor, and the towering figure of All Might looming in the corner of the room. She placed a hand lightly on Izuku's arm, giving him a reassuring squeeze. "Yes, you have my consent," she said, her voice steady yet soft. "But please, be careful. My son, he's been through enough already." Izuku, ever the curious, analytical mind, barely registered his mother's words. Already, his thoughts were racing, his mind jumping from one question to the next. Being conscious again, awake after a death-like experience, and having this new, terrifying power coursing through him, he was consumed with questions he could barely contain. "All Might," he began, his voice hoarse but eager, eyes wide with reverence. "I have so many questions. How do you do it? How do you keep being a hero, even when things are impossible? What inspired you to keep going, even when it seems like no one's safe?" His hands twitched slightly as he gestured, almost unconsciously, as if to emphasize the intensity of his curiosity. All Might's deep eyes softened, a proud yet thoughtful smile forming on his face. He took a slow breath, kneeling slightly to bring himself closer to Izuku's level again. "Young man," he said gently, voice warm and steady, "being a hero isn't about never failing. It's about knowing the stakes, knowing the danger, and choosing to face it anyway. I was inspired by the heroes who came before me, the people who refused to give up on others even when the world seemed impossible. And you've just shown the courage of a true hero, even before fully understanding the power you wield." Izuku's glowing eyes widened even further, awe and a flicker of hope sparking within him. He leaned slightly forward, eager to soak in every word. So, even when you were scared, even when it seemed like the villains were stronger than you could ever be. His voice cracked slightly, betraying the mixture of fear, hope, and curiosity swirling within him. All Might chuckled softly, a deep, resonant sound that filled the room with warmth. Even then, young Midoriya. Fear is part of being human. Courage is doing what you must despite that fear. And you awakening a quirk under such circumstances, saving others without even thinking of your own safety, you have that courage inside you. That is what makes a hero. Izuku's chest swelled, a strange combination of pride and disbelief filling him. The glow in his veins pulsed faintly as if in response to the praise, and he felt something stir deep in his chest, a sense of purpose, of potential, of the beginning of a path he had only dreamed of. Meanwhile, Inko watched her son, tears prickling her eyes again. She marveled at the words exchanged between him and All Might, at the young boy who had suffered so much finally seeing a glimpse of his potential, of the life he had always fought for. She reached out, brushing a strand of damp hair from his forehead, her fingers lingering for a moment, grounding him in the warmth of maternal love. The doctor, sensing the rising energy and the need for caution, spoke up gently. "If you're ready, Izuku Midoriya, we can begin the quirk analysis. It's painless, I promise, and it will help us understand the extent and limitations of your abilities." He held the syringe up, sterile and precise, a tool that felt simultaneously clinical and NTM. Izuku nodded, swallowing hard. "Okay, but I want to understand. I need to understand what I can do." His voice wavered, but his determination shone brightly through the exhaustion and pain. All Might placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, giving a small, encouraging squeeze. "Then we'll learn together," All Might said, voice steady and full of warmth. "You're not alone in this, Midoriya. Not now and not ever." Izuku's glowing eyes flickered, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips, even as the pulse of new power throbbed faintly beneath his skin. The journey ahead would be long, dangerous, and uncertain, but for the first time in his life, he felt ready. Izuku's pulse thudded in his temples as he watched the doctor methodically prepare the equipment. The sphygmomanometer, a blood pressure cuff, was snugged around his arm, the black fabric cold against his skin. He flinched slightly as the cuff slowly inflated, the pressure pressing tightly against his bicep, constricting his arm like a gentle vice. He could feel the veins beneath his skin stand out as if anticipating what was to come, the quiet hum of his own blood mixing with the faint residual pulse of antimatter energy that lingered after his quirk's awakening. The doctor's hands were calm and precise as he retrieved the syringe, its needle gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room. "Relax, Midoriya," the doctor murmured, his voice clinical but steady. "This will be quick." Izuku swallowed hard, nodding, trying to focus on the voice rather than the cold metal tip glinting menacingly in his line of sight. As the needle pierced his skin, a sharp sting ran through his arm, and Izuku's teeth clenched. He kept his eyes on the syringe, wide with anticipation, marveling at how life and now this strange new power flowed in visible currents through him. The doctor drew the blood carefully, lifting the syringe as a drop of deep red began to settle inside. But then, something impossible caught everyone's attention. The blood wasn't just red. Swirling alongside it was a faint, otherworldly glow, purple and blue streaks twisting and spiraling like miniature galaxies suspended in liquid. The glow pulsed rhythmically, almost in time with Izuku's heartbeat, as if the liquid itself were alive, radiating raw, untamed power. Inko gasped, bringing her hands to her mouth as tears pricked her eyes. "Izuku, it's glowing," she whispered, voice trembling with awe and fear. All Might's eyes widened, his usually bright expression dimming with the weight of realization. He leaned closer, his broad frame casting a shadow over the bed as he examined the syringe with an intensity usually reserved for crises threatening entire cities. This is beyond anything I've ever seen," he murmured, almost to himself, awe lacing every word. His hands rested on the edge of the bed, knuckles whitening slightly as he processed the implications of a quirk that could produce whatever this was internally. The doctor chuckled softly, shaking his head in disbelief, though a careful glint of excitement flickered in his eyes. "Well, I've studied quirks for decades," he said, placing the syringe on the tray with meticulous care, "but I've never seen blood like this. This isn't just a quirk, it's a phenomenon. Whatever this glowing liquid that flows in his veins is, it's stable yet potent." He let the thought hang in the air, the unspoken danger palpable. Izuku's own eyes followed the glowing liquid, pupils dilated with wonder and fear. His arm throbbed faintly where the needle had been, the bandage wrapped around it now snug, and he couldn't tear his gaze from the pulsating luminescence. A strange thrill coursed through him, almost like a magnetic pull, the first tangible proof of his power manifesting within him in a form he could see. The world felt different, sharper somehow, as if everything around him had gained a new texture and weight. The doctor carefully placed the syringe into a nearby analyzer, a sleek machine connected to the computer. The device began whirring softly, lights flickering as it processed the sample. On the screen, graphs and data began to appear, lines dancing in response to the liquid's properties. The glow in the blood seemed to intensify under the machine's sensors, reflecting a depth of energy and instability that made even seasoned professionals tense with fascination. The hum of the machine, the soft whirring of hospital equipment, and the quiet intake of breath from those around him made the room feel almost sacred. In that small, brightly lit hospital room, a boy who had once been quirkless was slowly discovering the terrifying and magnificent truth of who he could be. It didn't take long for the machine to finish its analysis. The analyzer released a low chime, almost hesitant, as if itself unsure how to interpret the data it had just processed. The monitor flickered once, then stabilized, spilling lines of glowing text and graphs across the screen. The doctor leaned forward, and his jaw slowly fell open. This is, his voice cracked. He covered his mouth with his hand, eyes wide, pupils trembling. Unbelievable. No, impossible. Izuku, sensing the shift in the room, sat up slightly, heart pounding. Doctor? The man tore his eyes from the screen, swallowing hard. This would definitely explain why your quirk took so long to manifest, he breathed. I've never seen anything like this, not in all my years as a quirk specialist. He gestured to the screen. Anatomical diagrams of Izuku's body rotated slowly, except they weren't normal muscle structures. Glowing streams of purple, blue, and ultraviolet energy spiraled through the digital representation of his veins, arteries, and nervous system like cosmic rivers. Your quirk, the doctor continued, voice now reverent, has rewritten your DNA. Izuku inhaled sharply. Inko covered her mouth, tears forming again. All Might took an unconscious step closer to the monitor, his enormous frame casting a long shadow on the wall. Rewritten his DNA? All Might echoed. Yes. The doctor clicked another window, revealing a strand of Izuku's DNA, except entire segments glowed bright violet, shifting subtly as though alive. Not only are you immune to antimatter, your body actively produces it. It pumps it through your bloodstream like oxygen. Izuku's blood ran cold. My body makes antimatter? As in if this touched normal matter. It should annihilate you, the doctor said bluntly. Yet your cells have adapted. No, transformed. Izuku stared at his hands trembling in his lap. Something within him, something vast, alien, yet undeniably him, seemed to pulse quietly beneath his skin. The doctor straightened, voice dropping to a near whisper. Your quirk, it supports the quirk singularity theory. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Inko froze. All Might's eyes widened, the heroic facade cracking into something deeply human: fear, awe, realization. Izuku blinked, confused. I've never heard of that. What is the quirk singularity theory? All Might inhaled deeply, looking suddenly older. It is the idea, he began, tone heavy, that quirks evolve exponentially with each generation. That one day a quirk will appear so overwhelmingly powerful that it forces the human body to adapt or die. He stepped closer to Izuku's bed. A quirk that breaks the boundaries of what a human is. One that defies physics, logic, reality itself. His gaze hardened not with anger, but with the weight of truth. Young Midoriya, you are proof that the theory is no longer a theory. Izuku's breath hitched. His world, once small, bleak, and full of rejection, suddenly felt terrifyingly big. The doctor continued, tapping through more diagrams. Your quirk is classified as both mutant and emitter. The mutant side permanently changed your biology. But your emitter side, he pointed at Izuku's palms, faint, star-like. Speckles of purple glowed beneath the skin. Your body has developed specialized channels, holes in your palms and feet that allow you to focus antimatter externally. He flipped to another page. You can discharge it as blasts, shape it into barriers, compress it into blades, even project it to distort space. And this, he pointed to a rapidly fluctuating graph labeled antimatter absorption capacity. This suggests you can temporarily pull the antimatter back into your core. Doing so would overcharge your cells and nervous system. Izuku swallowed. What does that do? The doctor hesitated. To put it simply, it would let you move faster than the speed of light. The room fell silent. All Might stiffened, eyes wide. Inko nearly fainted, gripping the bedside rail. Izuku felt his heart leap into his throat. Faster than light? Izuku whispered, horrified. That's not a human quirk. No, the doctor agreed softly. It's an evolution. He turned back to Izuku with a grave, almost fearful expression. Your body exists in a state between matter and antimatter. Between stability and cosmic annihilation. Midoriya, your quirk doesn't just break physics. His voice dropped to a trembling whisper. It rewrites them. Izuku stared at his trembling hands that once felt powerless, weak, empty. But now, they hummed with the energy of a dying star. His heart pounded. His breathing quickened. For the first time in his life, Izuku Midoriya wasn't quirkless. He was terrifying. He was powerful. The doctor sighed as he cleared his throat, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose while straightening his tie with a practiced tug. The fluorescent lights above hummed faintly, casting long, sharp shadows across the room as he tapped the clipboard with the tip of his pen. Now, he began, voice low and almost amused, let's get to the fun part. Izuku's pulse hammered in his ears. His palms were sweaty against the leather of the examination chair, and he could feel the faint vibration of something not quite energy, not quite pressure buzzing in his chest. His quirk. His quirk that he'd only just learned he had. The doctor leaned forward. What would you like to name your quirk? For a moment, Izuku's thoughts scattered like startled birds. A lifetime of being told he was quirkless. A lifetime of pitying looks, laughter, and stolen dreams. Enough of this. A power inside him that felt strange, cold, yet steady. A counterforce. Something that didn't just fight the world, something that reversed it. He swallowed, feeling the shape of the word forming before he even understood why it fit. Izuku lifted his head, a small but growing smile carving its way onto his face. And Flux, he said, the name rolling off his tongue with a quiet certainty. I want to name my quirk Anti-Flux. The doctor's pen paused mid-scratch. His eyebrows rose surprised, maybe impressed, but he wrote it down with a slow, deliberate nod. Well then, the doctor murmured, closing the folder with a soft click, Anti-Flux it is. A few weeks had passed, quiet, intense, life-changing weeks. Inko had called the school and explained everything, her voice trembling with a mix of worry and pride only a mother could carry. The school cleared Izuku for medical leave, giving him time to adjust, to learn, to become something entirely new. And All Might had gone above and beyond. Without hesitation, he paid for a top-tier quirk specialist, someone who had experience with volatile, reality-warping quirks the public never heard about. Someone who didn't flinch when things got dangerous. Someone who understood that Izuku Midoriya was now something extraordinary. The training was brutal. Every day, Izuku practiced pushing antimatter out from the glands deep inside his body, first in tiny controlled pulses. The moment he activated his quirk, The veins along his arms and legs began to glow an ethereal, electric purple, like liquid nebulae flowing beneath his skin. The glow would brighten, intensify, and crawl upward in branching streams toward his palms and the soles of his feet. Then a harmless spark of purple antimatter would flicker out, cracking like a star being born. At first, he could barely manage that much. But as he trained, as he learned how to widen the pathways and gather more antimatter at once, the glow became blinding. Light ran through him like lightning, pooling at his hands and feet until the air itself wavered with distortions. The first time he lost control, a sphere the size of a basketball erased part of the practice room floor clean, smooth, perfect, like reality had been scooped away. Izuku nearly vomited from fear. The specialist merely adjusted his glasses and said, "Excellent. Again." And Izuku learned. He learned how to regulate the output, letting the veins dim or brighten depending on how much antimatter he pushed. He learned to feel the antimatter moving inside him, rushing from the glands that produced it, following the glowing trails of his veins, gathering at the exit points beneath his skin. And when he absorbed the antimatter back into himself, everything reversed. The veins dimmed. The purple glow faded. The light that had blazed through his arms and legs receded like a tide. And deep within his body, the antimatter glands lit up instead, soft, pulsing orbs of violet energy humming with stored power. Izuku could feel them warm, heavy, vibrating with potential, like miniature stars beating in place of ordinary organs. The small glands, which numbered in the hundreds visible beneath his skin, glowing a soft purple and blue. Then came speed training. Learning to move faster than light wasn't just strange, it was cosmically disorienting. When he activated the speed aspect of his quirk, his veins erupted with brilliant purple, the antimatter pulling inward before detonating him forward. And then silence. Not the silence of a quiet room. The silence of no world at all. The moment he exceeded light speed, the universe froze. Dust motes hung in the air like suspended amethysts. A bird outside the window was frozen mid-flap, wings stretched, eyes unblinking. Trees bowed in a wind no longer blowing. Even the flicker of the overhead lights stalled in place, leaving the room stuck between frames. Time became a photograph. Izuku walked through it in awe, a faint violet glow trailing off him like stardust. He laughed, giddy, breathless, terrified because nothing had ever felt so impossible and thrilling and right. But no matter how incredible Anti-Flux was, no matter how much power surged through him, a single dread gnawed at him every night. His return was inevitable. He'd kept up with worksheets, stayed ahead on assignments, even studied harder than before, but none of that eased the twist in his stomach when he imagined walking back into that classroom. The whispers. The stares. Katsuki. Would they treat him better now that he had a quirk? Would Kaken finally stop looking at him like he was worthless? Would this new power just make him an even bigger target? Izuku didn't know. But the date circled on his calendar crept closer with every sunrise. And ready or not, the world was about to meet the new Izuku Midoriya. The weekend came and went far too quickly. Izuku stood at the sidewalk's edge, staring up at the familiar yet suddenly much smaller gate of Aldra Junior High. His heart thudded once, then steadied. The morning breeze rustled through his hair, sending soft waves through his thick, curly purple locks, each strand catching the sunlight with an iridescent sheen. His eyes, vivid, luminescent violet, glowed faintly even in daylight, the black scara around them making the color burn brighter, almost unreal. A small bird perched atop the school gate pet its head at him, curious. Izuku's glowing irises tracked its movements with eerie precision. The bird chirped once almost nervously and flew away. "Yeah, I get it," Izuku muttered quietly, stepping forward. Every step felt heavier than the last. Not because he feared Katsuki, but because this was the first time the old world would meet the new him. The hallways felt smaller than he remembered, cramped and buzzing with idle morning chatter. Students milled around laughing, complaining about homework, shoving past each other, but every conversation seemed to fade as Izuku passed by. Eyes lingered on him, confused, curious, unsettled by the strange glow pulsing faintly beneath his skin. He kept walking. And then he reached Class 3B. He took a slow breath, slid the door open, and stepped inside. The chatter died instantly. 18 pairs of eyes snapped toward him. Confusion spread through the room like a ripple. Who is that? Is he a transfer? What's with his eyes? That's creepy. Izuku ignored all of it, walking straight to his seat, the seat he'd occupied quietly for years, the seat no one ever cared enough to look at twice. He set his bag down, sat, and folded his hands on the desk. Silence. A loud bang as Katsuki slammed his fist on his desk and stood up. Hey! Who the hell are you, freaky eyes? Katsuki barked, lip curling. Tiny pops and crackles flared from his palms, lighting his scowl with flashes of orange. He took a few steps forward, glaring with the same hostility he'd shown Izuku his entire life. Except now? He didn't even recognize him. Izuku didn't look up right away. He didn't flinch. He didn't shrink. He just stared straight ahead, bored. Kaken. The word was spoken so casually, so flatly, that Katsuki's face froze mid-snarl. His eyes widened just a fraction, but enough for the whole class to see the shift. That voice. No way. Deku? Katsuki breathed, disbelief scrawled across his features. Finally, Izuku raised his head. His glowing purple irises locked onto Katsuki with ice-cold annoyance, the intensity of the light making Katsuki instinctively tense. The veins in Izuku's neck pulsed faintly with a purple glow, just barely visible above the collar of his school uniform. And those eyes. Those were not the eyes of someone Katsuki had spent years bullying. Those were the eyes of someone who no longer cared. Can you just leave me the hell alone for once? Izuku said, voice calm, steady, dangerously unimpressed. A shiver ran down Katsuki's spine. No one talked to him like that, ever. His shock twisted into rage. You little. Katsuki moved his hand forward, an explosion sparking violently to life. But Izuku was already moving. He inhaled. His veins went dark pitch black, like ink freezing beneath the skin. And then, all at once, the antimatter glands across his body erupted with glowing purple light. Hundreds of tiny star-like nodes beneath his skin flickered to life, glowing brighter and brighter until they illuminated his entire figure like a constellation. The world slowed, then stopped. Sound vanished. Motion vanished. Students froze mid-gasp. The explosion Katsuki had begun forming stalled in mid-air, a bloom of orange sparks locked in perfect stillness. Time had stopped. Izuku stood from his desk, purple light pulsing gently from the glands under his skin. His movements created ripples in the frozen air, like he was walking through water. He stepped forward, drew his fist back, and he punched Katsuki square in the jaw. Time snapped back. The antimatter surged from his glands back into his veins, making them brighten with purple luminescence once more. Katsuki's explosion fizzled out as he was violently launched across the classroom, slamming into the whiteboard with a sickening thud before collapsing to the ground in a heap. Gasps erupted around the room. Someone screamed. Someone else dropped their pencil. Izuku stood where Katsuki had been moments earlier, the glow from his antimatter glands fading slowly as the light returned to his veins. He dusted off his sleeve. Prick, he muttered casually, sitting back down as if he hadn't just obliterated the class tyrant in under a second. The room was dead silent. Every student stared at him, not with mockery, not with annoyance, but with wide-eyed awe and primal fear. The silence shattered when the classroom door slammed open. Mr. Tanaka, their homeroom teacher, rushed in with a stack of papers in one hand and panic etched across his face. What on earth is going? He froze. His eyes locked onto Katsuki Bakugo's limp body crumpled at the front of the room, then tracked across the shocked, trembling students, and finally landed on Izuku sitting peacefully at his desk like absolutely nothing had happened. Who, what? Mr. Tanaka sputtered, his face draining of color as the papers slipped from his hands and scattered across the floor like startled birds. Izuku lifted one hand lazily, scratching the back of his head. His voice was calm, almost bored. I did teach, sorry. He got in my face. A few students gasped at how casually he admitted it. Tanaka gulped so hard it was audible, sweat beading at his temples. He already looked exhausted, mentally writing the mountain of paperwork this incident would demand. "Midoriya," he croaked, "please report to the principal's office immediately." "Yeah." "Figured," Izuku replied with a sigh, slinging his bag over one shoulder. He didn't rush, didn't shrink, didn't fold inward like he always had. He just walked unbothered. The hallway lights hummed softly as he made his way down the familiar route, each footstep echoing with a heavier sense of authority than he'd ever carried before. Students who caught a glimpse of him from open classroom doors quickly pulled back like frightened animals, whispering frantically behind his back. Izuku ignored them. When he reached the principal's office, he raised a knuckle and knocked twice. A smooth, overly warm voice answered instantly. "Come in, Midoriya." Too eager, too cheerful, too fake. Izuku stepped inside. Principal Nakamura sat behind his polished oak desk, hands folded neatly, smile stretched wide across his face like a politician greeting cameras. His eyes were measuring Izuku like a valuable resource that had finally become useful. "Ah, Midoriya. Please, take a seat." His tone was drenched in artificial sweetness. Izuku sat, back straight, expression unreadable. The principal cleared his throat dramatically. "Well then, let's address the elephant in the room, shall we? Here it comes. You assaulted a student." Izuku stayed silent. Principal Nakamura steepled his fingers. "Now, violence in Aldra High is, of course, unacceptable." A lie. Izuku had been beaten nearly daily. Nakamura had never once intervened. "But," the principal continued quickly, smile widening, "I also understand this is a complicated time for you. Adjusting to a quirk awakening so late can be very stressful." Izuku almost laughed. They'd ignored his suffering for years. Now they were acting like none of it ever happened. The principal leaned forward, eyes gleaming with opportunistic interest. "Congratulations, by the way. A powerful emitter-type quirk, yes? Very impressive. Truly wonderful news for the school's records." His voice rose with excitement. "It will reflect incredibly well on our institution to have helped nurture such potential." Izuku felt something cold twist in his stomach. Nakamura wasn't happy for him. He was happy for publicity. "As for your altercation," the principal continued with a dismissive wave of the hand, "I'm sure we can chalk it up to misunderstanding. Boys your age, new power, adrenaline. It happens." "It happens?" When Izuku was the one being beaten bloody, it never happened. He was told to toughen up. He was told to stop provoking others. He was told, this school is not responsible for incidents caused by your limitations. But now he had a quirk. A powerful one. And suddenly the principal's tone had flipped like a switch. Nakamura's smile tightened. "Just refrain from any further outbursts, yes? We wouldn't want to tarnish your future prospects." His voice dipped slightly, a warning hidden in admiration. "Or the school's reputation." Izuku met his gaze head on, something he'd never been able to do before. "Understood," Izuku said quietly. Principal Nakamura's grin faltered for a split second. Something about Izuku's glowing eyes, or maybe his calm confidence, unsettled him, but he recovered quickly. "Well then, off you go. And again, Midoriya, congratulations." His voice dripped with hypocrisy. Izuku stood, bowed politely because he refused to sink to their level, and left the office. Behind him, the principal exhaled in shaky relief, dabbing sweat from his forehead. He swore that Izuku was going to glare a hole through him. Izuku sighed as he pinched the bridge of his nose. This was going to be fun, he thought as he began to slowly walk back to class. As a bonus, I generated some pics of what Izuku looks like in this story. Diagram of Izuku's circulatory system after quirk awakening. What Izuku looks like after quirk awakening. The whispers followed Izuku like a trail of smoke as he made his way back to class. His footsteps echoed through the empty hallway, each sound amplified by the tense silence that seemed to spread before him. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, casting strange shadows that danced across the walls as he walked. His purple veins pulsed gently beneath his skin, a constant reminder of the power that now coursed through his body. Students peeking from classroom doorways quickly ducked back inside at the sight of him. Their hushed conversations carried through the thin walls. "Did you hear? He took down Bakugo in less than a second. Those eyes. They're like something out of a horror movie. Are his veins glowing? Isn't that the quirkless freak?" Izuku kept his face neutral, though internally he felt a complex mix of emotions churning in his chest. Part of him wanted to smile at their fear, a dark satisfaction after years of being the one who was afraid. But another part ached with a deeper sadness. Even with a quirk, he was still an outsider. The only difference now was that they feared him instead of mocking him. When he reached Class 3B, he paused at the door. Through the window, he could see Katsuki's empty desk. The explosive boy had presumably been taken to the nurse's office. The rest of the class sat in unusual silence, their usual morning chatter replaced by tense whispers and darting glances. Izuku slid the door open. The whispers died instantly. Every head snapped forward, students suddenly finding their textbooks fascinating. Mr. Tanaka fumbled with his chalk, nearly dropping it as Izuku walked to his seat. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. "As I was saying," Mr. Tanaka continued shakily, "the Meiji Restoration began in." Izuku tuned him out, his mind wandering to the nurse's office where Katsuki lay unconscious. He hadn't meant to hit him quite that hard. His control over his enhanced speed was still imperfect. But maybe it was for the best. Maybe now Katsuki would finally understand what it felt like to be on the receiving end of violence. In the nurse's office, Katsuki Bakugo's consciousness returned slowly, like wading through thick fog. The first thing he registered was pain. His jaw throbbed with a deep ache that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. His back felt like it had been slammed by a truck, every muscle screaming in protest as he tried to move. "Stay still," the nurse's stern voice cut through his daze. "You took quite a hit." Katsuki's eyes snapped open, memories flooding back. Deku? No, not the Deku he knew, standing there with those haunting purple eyes. The world blurring and then darkness. His hands clenched into fists, small. Explosions popping between his fingers. But for the first time in his life, the anger was mixed with something else. Something that made his stomach twist uncomfortably. Fear that someone could finally compete with him, fear that he wasn't the strongest anymore. He had always seen Deku as beneath him, a pebble in his path to greatness. But what he'd felt in that moment, when those glowing eyes had locked onto his, it wasn't the gaze of someone weaker. It was the look of someone who could erase him from existence without breaking a sweat. "That DMN nerd," Katsuki muttered, but the usual venom in his voice was diluted by uncertainty. He pressed a hand to his jaw, wincing at the tenderness. "What the hell kind of quirk is that?" The nurse gave him a knowing look. "The kind that should remind you that power isn't everything, young man. Perhaps this will teach you to think twice before antagonizing others." Katsuki wanted to snap back, to rage against the implication that he had learned any kind of lesson. But his jaw ached too much to argue, and somewhere deep in his mind, a seed of respect had taken root, not that he'd ever admit it. For the first time, someone had truly beaten him. Not with luck or circumstance, but with raw power and skill. And it had been Deku, the same Deku he'd tormented for years. The realization sat heavy in his stomach as he stared at the ceiling, his pride wrestling with a new and uncomfortable reality. The nurse sighed as she checked Katsuki's vitals one final time, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. "Well, nothing seems permanently damaged," she said, her tone clipped. "Though that bruise will take a few days to fade completely. You can return to class, but," she added sharply as Katsuki began to rise, "try to have restraint. I don't want to see you here again, young man." Katsuki clicked his tongue, but said nothing. The warning in her voice was clear enough. As he stood, his muscles protested, sending sharp jolts of pain through his back. One punch. One goddamn punch from Deku had done this to him. The thought made his blood boil, but the anger felt different now, tinged with something that felt uncomfortably like respect. The hallway seemed longer than usual as he made his way back to class, each step measured and careful. His usual stomping stride was gone, replaced by a cautious gait that spoke volumes about how much his body ached. When he reached the classroom door, he hesitated, just for a moment, before sliding it open. The atmosphere inside was strange, almost surreal. Students who normally would have greeted him enthusiastically now seemed absorbed in their work, their eyes carefully avoiding both him and the purple-haired figure sitting quietly at his desk. Katsuki moved to his seat without a word, ignoring the whispers that followed him. As soon as the lunch bell rang, the classroom erupted into barely contained chaos. Most students fled quickly, but Hiro Tanaka, a boy who had frequently joined in mocking Izuku, lingered behind. Katsuki watched with narrowed eyes as Hiro approached Izuku's desk, wearing what had to be the most artificial smile ever attempted by a human being. "Hey, Midoriya." Hiro's voice was sickeningly sweet, dripping with false friendship. "That was pretty amazing earlier. I had no idea you had such an awesome quirk." He leaned against Izuku's desk, trying to appear casual despite the nervous sweat beading on his forehead. "We should totally hang out sometime. Maybe you could tell me more about your powers." Izuku slowly looked up from his notebook, his glowing purple eyes fixing on Hiro with an intensity that made the boy flinch. The veins in Izuku's neck pulsed faintly, casting small shadows across his collar. "Funny," Izuku said quietly, his voice carrying a chill that made several nearby students shiver. "Last week you were calling me quirkless loser and throwing my shoes in the toilet." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Now you want to be friends?" Hiro's smile wavered, but he pressed on, desperation clear in his voice. "Come on man, that was just. Kids being kids. We were just joking around." He laughed nervously. "But seriously, what kind of quirk is that? The way you moved, it was like you teleported or something." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as Izuku stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor with an ominous screech. The antimatter glands beneath his skin began to glow faintly, creating a constellation-like pattern across his visible skin. Hiro stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his own feet. "My quirk is called Anti-Flux," Izuku said, his voice steady but cold. "And I'm not interested in being friends with someone who only sees value in power." He gathered his things, the purple glow fading as he controlled his emotions. "Find someone else to kiss up to." From his desk, Katsuki watched the exchange with an unreadable expression. The Deku standing there now was nothing like the scared, stuttering kid he'd known for years. This Deku carried himself with confidence. No, more than that. He carried himself with authority. As Izuku walked past Hiro, who had frozen like a deer in headlights, the would-be sycophant finally found his voice again. "Why you can't talk to me like that?" he squeaked, though his voice betrayed his fear. "Just because you have a quirk now doesn't mean..." Izuku stopped at the door, turning just his head to look back. The motion was subtle, but the way his eyes glowed in that moment made Hiro's words die in his throat. "Actually," Izuku said softly, "it means exactly that. You all made it very clear that having a quirk is what matters in this world." His lips curved into a small, sad smile. "I'm just playing by the rules you taught me." With that, he left the classroom, leaving behind a silence so profound you could hear a pin drop. Hiro slumped against a desk, legs shaking. Several students exchanged nervous glances. And Katsuki? Katsuki stared at the door long after Izuku had gone, his mind churning with thoughts he couldn't quite process. The school day passed in its usual blur, Izuku keeping to himself, eyes down, shoulders tight, ignoring the fake smiles and soft voices of classmates trying to curry favor now that he suddenly mattered. Their stares felt like buzzing flies, constant, irritating, and impossible to fully tune out. When the final bell rang, he moved on autopilot. Notebooks, pens, bag. He reached for the last notebook, the most important one, only for a familiar scarred hand to press down on. Firmly. Izuku froze. Katsuki stood there, face unreadable. Not angry. Not smirking. Just blank. And that expression alone put Izuku on edge. "Care to tell me what the hell happened to you, nerd?" Katsuki asked, voice low and surprisingly calm. Where'd that quirk come from? That calmness felt wrong. Like Katsuki had been replaced by some quiet, simmering version of himself that Izuku wasn't sure he trusted. Izuku slid the notebook out from under Katsuki's hand, slipped it into his bag, and stood up. Follow me. I'd rather not say anything with half the school eavesdropping. Some part of him buried deep under years of insults and explosions still didn't want to hate Katsuki. Some stupid, stubborn part held on to the kid they used to be. The one who ran around with him in the park. The one who used to grin genuinely, before ego and quirks twisted everything. Katsuki scoffed lightly but fell in step behind him. Fine. But where are we going, nerd? My home, Izuku replied plainly. Katsuki blinked, clearly not expecting that answer. He didn't argue though. Just shoved his hands deeper into his pockets and followed as if pulled by curiosity he couldn't suppress. The walk was quiet, awkwardly so. Katsuki kept staring at Izuku's back, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Izuku pretended not to notice. When they reached the apartment complex, Izuku unlocked the door and stepped inside. Mom, I'm home. I brought Kaken over, he called out. Inko turned from the stove, apron on, hair slightly frazzled from her usual flustered cooking mode. She was making katsudon. The smell was unmistakable, warm and nostalgic. The good kind of heavy. The moment she saw Katsuki, her eyes widened with pure joy, the kind only a parent figure could muster. Oh, Katsuki, she gasped, immediately abandoning the pot on the stove and rushing over. Before Katsuki could react, she pulled him into a tight hug. Katsuki's entire body stiffened like he'd been hit with a stun grenade. Hey. Auntie Inko, come on, but he didn't pull away. Not really. His arms hovered awkwardly at his sides before, very hesitantly, one hand tapped her back in some vague attempt at reciprocation. Izuku had to bite his lip to keep from laughing, earning a glare from Katsuki. Inko finally let him breathe, holding him at arm's length, eyes sparkling. Look at you. You've gotten so tall. And those muscles, oh my. How have you been? It's been so long. Katsuki grumbled, cheeks dusted pink. I've been fine. Just, busy. Inko giggled warmly. Still trying to act tough, I see. Izuku watched the scene with a strange mixture of warmth and discomfort. It was like looking at a life that could have been. One where they stayed friends. One where things didn't fracture beyond repair. Mom, Izuku said softly, snapping her attention. Can we talk in my room? It's important. Inko's expression sobered instantly. She nodded, gently patting Katsuki's arm. Of course. I'll finish dinner. You two go ahead. Izuku gestured down the hall, heart thudding in his chest. Katsuki followed, but not before sending a confused, slightly conflicted glance toward Inko like he couldn't reconcile being treated with affection after years of being the aggressor. Once they stepped into Izuku's room and Izuku shut the door behind them, the air grew heavier. Katsuki crossed his arms, leaning against the wall. All right, nerd. We're alone. Talk. Izuku turned toward him, eyes glowing faintly, a subtle pulse Katsuki noticed immediately. Izuku let out a long, tired breath as he sat on the edge of his bed, the springs creaking softly beneath him. Katsuki dropped into the desk chair across from him, arms crossed, legs spread like he owned the place, but the tiniest flicker of unease betrayed him. Well, Izuku began, rubbing the back of his neck, for starters, I nearly died. Katsuki's eyes snapped wide. It was subtle, but for Katsuki, it may as well have been a scream of shock. His jaw tightened, a memory flashing across his face. Those awful words he'd spat hours earlier. And no, Izuku added sharply, I didn't take a swan dive. Katsuki bristled. I wasn't thinking that, dumbass, he snapped, but the guilt in his voice cracked through. Izuku didn't push it. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. A sludge villain, he caught me off guard. Wrapped around me and, Izuku mimed something constricting his throat, tried to suffocate me so he could take my body. Katsuki actually recoiled. His pupils shrank. For once, he wasn't angry, he was terrified. Look at you, Izuku teased gently, showing emotions other than rage. Katsuki exploded immediately. Shut the hell up, nerd. This ain't something to joke about. His voice cracked with something Izuku hadn't heard in years. Fear. Izuku only smiled faintly. I know. So listen. He inhaled deeply. He did kill me, in a way. For a moment he completely took control of my body. Katsuki's fists tightened so hard his knuckles turned pale. But then my quirk awakened. Izuku reached down, grabbing the hem of his shirt. Katsuki's glare followed him suspiciously. And this is where things get complicated. He pulled the shirt off. Katsuki froze. Glowing, pulsing lines, bright blue and violet, branched beneath Izuku's skin like rivers of light. They webbed across his torso, down his arms, along his neck, and beneath his eyes. They throbbed softly with each beat of his heart. Katsuki could see the faint shimmer of something alien swirling inside Izuku's chest cavity. "What the hell?" Katsuki whispered, voice gone small. "My quirk is a hybrid-type emitter and mutant," Izuku explained calmly. "It's called anti-flux. When it activated, hundreds of microscopic glands inside me woke up." He tapped his ribs and collarbone. "They're all connected to my circulatory system. They produce antimatter constantly and pump it directly into my bloodstream." Katsuki blinked. Pumping antimatter through your veins?" Izuku nodded. "That's how I survived." The antimatter expelled the sludge villain and disintegrated about 80% of his body mass. Katsuki's shock twisted slowly into a feral grin. "That's metal as hell. Almost killed the BSTRD who tried to kill you." "Good." Izuku snorted. "It wasn't intentional. But yeah." He lifted his right hand, palm facing upward. The circular opening in the center, the antimatter vent, glowed faintly. "These vents in my palms and the ones on my feet let me release antimatter. Like this." A swirling sphere of violet-blue antimatter bloomed outward, expanding into a perfect, unstable globe the size of a golf ball. The air around it shimmered like heat rising off asphalt. Katsuki stared, breath held. Izuku flicked his wrist. The sphere zipped across the room, passing so close to Katsuki's cheek that it made the hair on his skin lift before colliding with an Endeavor action figure on the desk. The figure didn't break, didn't burn, didn't melt. It simply imploded, crushed into a pinprick of nothingness before vanishing entirely. Katsuki's jaw dropped. "What the sheet? You could've." "I can control the potency," Izuku cut in quickly. "That was a weak one. It's way safer than it looks." Katsuki stared at him like he'd just witnessed a god sneezing. Izuku waved a hand. The glow in his veins dulled, slightly fading from vibrant neon to a soft pulse. As it dimmed, hundreds of tiny glowing dots appeared across his skin, minute antimatter pores flickering with activity. "I can also reabsorb antimatter back into my bloodstream," he continued. "When I do, it supercharges the glands and gives me temporary boosts. Speed, strength, reaction time. Earlier today, when I sent you flying into a wall?" Katsuki's eye twitched. Izuku grinned. "Light speed movement." Katsuki slammed a hand on the desk. You sheet. You actually you." He sputtered, face red, but behind the anger was pure, electrified awe. Katsuki stared at him for a long moment, breathing hard, expression unreadable. Then he spoke, voice low and serious. "Deku, that's insane. That's dangerous as hell. And kinda awesome." Katsuki's gaze sharpened. "But if you ever pull that lightspeed crap on me again without warning." Izuku smirked. "You'll what? Explode at me?" Katsuki pointed a trembling finger at him. "I'll shut up." Izuku couldn't help but laugh at Katsuki's competitive scowl as he pulled his shirt back on, the faint purple glow of his antimatter glands dimming as the energy flowed back into his veins like liquid starlight. The training session had left them both exhausted, but there was a newfound camaraderie in their rivalry now, something that had emerged gradually since that first confrontation at school. The smell of katsudon wafted through the apartment just as Inko's cheerful voice called out, "Dinner's ready," from the kitchen, and Izuku glanced at his former tormentor-turned-sparring partner with a knowing smile. "Text your mom that you're over here. I'm sure mom made you a bowl," he said, watching as Katsuki tried and failed to hide his eagerness. Their relationship had shifted so drastically that these dinner invitations had become almost routine, though Katsuki maintained his prickly exterior with a gruff, "It better be spicy," as he followed Izuku to the kitchen. the gentle pulse of Izuku's quirk casting subtle purple shadows on the walls as they walked. Months passed like leaves in autumn, each day blending into the next. Izuku sat at his desk, his glowing purple eyes half-lidded with boredom as he absently traced the patterns of his antimatter glands through his sleeve. Mr. Tanaka's voice droned on about future careers and life choices, the words washing over the classroom like white noise. The morning sun filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the room and making Izuku's purple veins shimmer faintly beneath his skin. But who am I kidding? Mr. Tanaka suddenly exclaimed with theatrical flair, breaking the monotony. We all know what you all want to be. He threw the career guidance papers into the air with uncharacteristic enthusiasm, letting them scatter like confetti. Heroes. The classroom erupted into chaos. Students jumped from their seats, quirks activating in excitement despite school regulations. One boy's fingers stretched like rubber, another girl's hair began to glow, and someone in the back row started floating. The only two who remained seated were Izuku and Katsuki, one radiating quiet confidence, the other barely contained irritation. Now, Mr. Tanaka called out, hastily gathering the scattered papers while trying to maintain some semblance of order. You all know quirks aren't allowed in the classroom. His voice carried the weary tone of someone who'd repeated this rule countless times. The students settled down reluctantly, their quirks deactivating one by one, though the excitement still buzzed in the air like static electricity. Mr. Tanaka straightened the recovered papers against his desk, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed the career sheets they'd filled out the previous week. The room fell into an anticipatory silence, broken only by the occasional whisper and the distant sound of birds outside. His eyes widened slightly as he came across two particular forms, and he cleared his throat, once, twice, before speaking. It seems, he began, his voice carrying a mix of pride and nervousness, that we have two students aiming for UA this year. The announcement sent a ripple through the classroom. Whispers erupted like wildfire, students turning in their seats to look at the two most likely candidates. The name UA hung in the air like a dream, the most prestigious hero school in Japan, a beacon of excellence that accepted less than 1% of its applicants. Katsuki and Izuku, probably, someone whispered. The two strongest quirks in our year. Did you see them sparring last week? The whole field was destroyed. Mr. Tanaka raised his hand for silence, though his own voice trembled slightly with emotion. Midoriya, Bakugo, he announced, looking at each boy in turn. Izuku's eyes glowed a fraction brighter, while Katsuki's usual scowl deepened. I wish you both the best of luck in getting into UA. The words settled over the classroom like a heavy blanket. Students glanced between the two powerhouses of their year, Katsuki Bakugo, whose explosive quirk had always marked him for greatness, and Izuku Midoriya, whose late-blooming anti-flux had transformed him from a quirkless nobody into something approaching legendary. The tension between them was palpable, not hostile anymore, but charged with competitive energy. Katsuki and Izuku exchanged loaded glances across the classroom. Their smirks mirrored each other, not with the malice that had once defined their relationship, but with something deeper, more complex. Months of sparring sessions, shared lunches, and gradual understanding had transformed their dynamic. What was once pure hatred had evolved into a peculiar blend of brotherhood and fierce rivalry, each pushing the other to grow stronger. The glowing purple veins beneath Izuku's skin pulsed with quiet amusement as Katsuki, true to his nature, couldn't resist the urge to showboat. With his feet propped up on his desk and that characteristic arrogant grin spreading across his face, Katsuki addressed their teacher with his usual lack of filter. Hey teach. His voice carried that familiar explosive confidence, drawing all eyes in the room. Don't lump me and Izuku in with these bunch of losers. We're the real deal. He gestured dismissively at their classmates, small sparks dancing between his fingers. These extras will be lucky to end up as sidekicks to some busted D-lister. The class bristled at the insult, but before anyone could react, Izuku's eyes flickered with purple light. With practiced precision, he formed a minuscule sphere of antimatter, no larger than a penny, in the palm of his hand, pushing it between his thumb and forefinger. The tiny orb pulsed with violent potential as he flicked it toward Katsuki's desk, striking the pencil lying there with surgical accuracy. The pencil didn't break or snap. It simply ceased to exist, imploding into nothingness with a soft pop that made Katsuki jolt in his seat, his feet hitting the floor with a thud. Several students gasped at the casual display of power, while others instinctively leaned away from the purple-eyed boy. "Be nice," Izuku said flatly, his tone carrying the weight of someone who could erase matter from existence as easily as breathing. Then, slowly, his lips curved into a grin that made even Katsuki's confident facade crack slightly. It wasn't the nervous smile of the old Deku. This was something else entirely, an expression that reminded everyone present of exactly why they'd stopped underestimating him months ago. Katsuki's eye twitched as he stared at the empty space where his pencil had been, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple. Even after all these months of training together, Izuku's casual displays of power still managed to unnerve him. Not that he'd ever admit it out loud. Now, children, settle down, we have class to get to." Mr. Tanaka started as he spoke, completely ignoring what Izuku did. "Special treatment to those with powerful quirks in this corrupt school. Open your textbooks to page 78. The final bell's ring echoed through the emptying halls of Aldra Junior High, signaling freedom. Izuku and Katsuki walked side by side toward the school's front gate, their shadows stretching long in the afternoon sun. The antimatter glands beneath Izuku's skin pulsed with a gentle rhythm, like stars twinkling beneath the surface. A mischievous thought crossed his mind, making his purple eyes brighten slightly. "Hey, Kaken," Izuku said casually, a hint of playfulness in his tone that immediately made Katsuki suspicious. "I want to try something." Before Katsuki could voice his objection, Izuku's left palm began to glow intensely. The perfectly circular hole in his hand, one of several anatomical changes caused by his quirk, flickered with violent purple energy. With practiced precision, he projected a sphere of antimatter roughly the size of a tennis ball, the unstable mass hovering ominously before them. The sphere drifted away from Izuku's palm, pulsing with otherworldly energy. Suddenly, it began to expand, the edges stretching and warping reality itself as it grew into an oval large enough for a person to step through. The interior of the portal swirled with cosmic violence, purple and blue energies dancing like auroras in a midnight sky. Izuku's grin widened as he placed his hand firmly on Katsuki's back. "Time for a field test." "Wait, what the foo?" Katsuki's protest was cut short as Izuku shoved him forward into the swirling vortex. For a brief moment, Katsuki experienced what could only be described as existing everywhere and nowhere at once, his atoms singing with dimensional displacement. Then, reality snapped back into focus as he stumbled onto the familiar sidewalk outside Izuku's apartment building. Moments later, Izuku stepped through the portal with casual grace, the antimatter construct collapsing behind him with a soft whoosh. His veins glowed brightly from the quirk usage, creating intricate patterns across his visible skin. "Oh good, you didn't die," Izuku remarked with deadpan dildoy, though his eyes sparkled with barely contained amusement. Katsuki's face contorted through several emotions before settling on rage. His hands sparked dangerously as he grabbed Izuku's collar, pulling him close enough that their noses nearly touched. "What do you mean you didn't die?" he roared, small explosions popping between his fingers. "That could have killed me, you stupid nerd." Izuku met Katsuki's furious red eyes with his own glowing purple ones, completely unfazed. His black scara seemed to absorb and reflect the purple light, creating an almost hypnotic effect. A smirk played at the corners of his mouth as he spoke. "You didn't die, did you?" His voice carried that particular tone that always managed to get under Katsuki's skin. "Besides, I've known how to do that for a while now. I just wanted to mess with you." Katsuki's eye twitched violently as he processed this information. With a frustrated growl, he released Izuku's collar, shoving him away. "You're such an but now, you know that?" he grumbled, though there was a hint of reluctant respect in his voice. Izuku straightened his uniform, failing to completely suppress his laughter. The antimatter glands beneath his skin pulsed with residual energy, creating shifting shadows across his face that made his amused expression look almost ethereal. "I try," Izuku responded with mock innocence, his purple eyes gleaming with mischief as he fished his house key from his pocket. The metal clinked softly against the lock, and as the door swung open, they were immediately enveloped by the rich, comforting aroma of homemade soba. The scent wafted through the apartment like a warm embrace, carrying with it the familiar feeling of home that had become increasingly common to both boys. "Forgot how much Auntie likes to cook," Katsuki muttered, though the slight softening of his usually sharp features betrayed his appreciation. He stepped inside with the comfortable familiarity of someone who had made this transition from guest to family over the past few months. Izuku followed, his antimatter glands dimming to a soft glow as he relaxed, the door clicking shut behind them. In the kitchen, Inko Midoriya stood before the stove, her green hair tied back neatly as she tended to several pots with practiced care. At the sound of their entrance, she turned, her face lighting up with that particular warmth that seemed to be reserved specially for her two boys, because somewhere along the line, Katsuki had become as much her child as Izuku. "Had a feeling you'd come over today," she said, her voice carrying that maternal knowing that mothers somehow always possess. Steam rose behind her as she adjusted the burner temperature, letting the soba stock simmer to perfection. "I got out the ingredients to make your bowl to your liking, sweetheart." The endearment rolled off her tongue naturally, as if she'd never stopped using it for Katsuki, even during those years of distance. Before Katsuki could maintain his usual prickly exterior, Inko crossed the kitchen with surprising speed. Her arms wrapped around him in a motherly embrace that completely ignored his height advantage, pulling him down to her level. Despite his growth spurt, despite his fierce reputation, in Inko's arms he was still that little boy who used to share All Might action figures with her son. "Unhand me, woman," Katsuki protested, his voice lacking any real heat as he struggled half-heartedly against the hug. His face flushed red with embarrassment, hands sparking tiny, harmless explosions in his fluster. The display only made Inko hold on tighter, years of dealing with explosive personalities having made her immune to such protests. Izuku leaned against the wall, his purple eyes dancing with amusement as he watched his former tormentor-turned-brother figure squirm in his mother's embrace. A snort of laughter escaped him, earning a deadly glare from Katsuki that might have been more intimidating if he wasn't still trapped in what Inko lovingly called her mom hug. The antimatter glands visible on Izuku's neck pulsed softly with his contained laughter, casting gentle purple shadows across the familiar scene. This was their new normal, a reality where Katsuki Bakugo pretended to hate Inko Midoriya's hugs while secretly cherishing them, where two boys who had once been bitter enemies now shared meals and laughter like brothers, and where the scent of homemade soba filled an apartment that had become a sanctuary for both of them. The morning sun cast long shadows across UA's entrance, the prestigious school's gates stretching toward the sky like golden fingers reaching for the clouds. Izuku stood motionless, his purple eyes reflecting the metallic sheen of the archway while his antimatter glands pulsed with nervous energy beneath his skin. Somewhere ahead, he could hear Katsuki's voice barking at other examinees to get out of his way, typical Kaken behavior. "A couple of months ago, I never thought I'd make it here," Izuku thought, his fingers curling into tight fists as he stared up at the imposing structure. "But here I am, with a quirk I could only dream of, taking my first step towards becoming a hero." The veins in his arms glowed softly with purple light, a reminder of how much had changed. A sudden sharp slap between his shoulder blades jolted him from his reverie, making him stumble forward slightly. "What's wrong, getting cold feet now?" a cheerful voice chirped behind him. Izuku turned, coming face to face with a girl whose pink skin seemed to glow in the morning light. Her eyes widened as their gazes met, a look of excited recognition crossing her features. "Whoa, our eyes are similar," she exclaimed, leaning closer to examine his face. Indeed, her yellow irises set against black scara mirrored his own unusual eye structure, though his purple glow contrasted with her vibrant yellow. "Anyways, I'm Mina Ishido." She bounced on her feet, radiating an energy that seemed to directly contrast Izuku's more reserved demeanor. "Nice to meet you." A soft smirk tugged at Izuku's lips, his antimatter glands dimming slightly as he relaxed. Yeah, I guess our eyes are pretty similar. I'm Izuku Midoriya. As they began walking toward the examination room, Mina skipped alongside him, seemingly immune to the nervous tension that plagued most other candidates. So, what's your quirk? She asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Something cool, right? Those glowy veins look super intense. Izuku chuckled, holding up his palm to show her the circular hole that ran straight through it. It's called anti-flux. I can generate and control antimatter. To demonstrate, he created a tiny sphere of purple energy above his palm, letting it hover and spin like a miniature galaxy. That's so cool. Mina's eyes sparkled with excitement. I can shoot acid from my skin. Maybe we could be the corrosive duo or something. She laughed at her own joke, then pointed ahead. Oh hey, is that explosive guy your friend? The one yelling at everyone. Kaken? Izuku's eyes found Katsuki in the crowd, who was indeed creating quite a scene. Yeah, we grew up together. 'Tis an acquired taste. Do you? Katsuki's voice boomed across the courtyard. Stop flirting and get your butt over here. The exam's about to start. Izuku's eye twitched slightly as several other examinees turned to stare. Mina burst into giggles beside him. Deku. Childhood nickname, Izuku sighed, his veins pulsing with slight embarrassment. It used to be an insult, but now it's more of a friendly annoyance. Well, Deku, Mina grinned, linking her arm through his as they approached the building, ignoring his surprised expression. I think we're going to be great friends. Assuming we both pass, of course. The raccoon eyes. Hurry the hell up. Raccoon eyes? Mina blinked, then laughed. Oh, he gives everyone nicknames, huh? You have no idea, Izuku muttered, but found himself smiling despite himself. As they entered the building together, he couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, UA would be more than just a step toward becoming a hero. Maybe it would be where he finally found his place. The examination room loomed ahead, filled with the murmur of hundreds of hopeful students. Izuku felt his antimatter glands warm with anticipation. Whatever came next, he was ready to face it, not as the quirkless kid he'd once been, but as someone who could shape his own destiny. The examination hall buzzed with nervous energy as Izuku and Mina entered, their linked arms drawing curious glances from other applicants. Katsuki, already lounging in his seat with his feet propped up, caught sight of them and a predatory grin spread across his face. Well, we haven't been here for 10 minutes and Deku's got a girlfriend, Katsuki called out loud enough for nearby students to hear, his voice dripping with smug satisfaction. The effect was immediate. Mina froze mid-step, her pink complexion somehow deepening to an even darker shade of rose. Her yellow and black eyes widened comically as she processed Katsuki's words. Izuku shot his friend a withering glare, his purple eyes intensifying their glow briefly. Katsuki just cackled as he made his way to his assigned seat, clearly pleased with the chaos he'd caused. Izuku looked down at the still frozen Mina, noting how the tips of her horns had turned a darker pink. He poked her forehead gently, his antimatter glands pulsing softly beneath his skin. You good, Pinky? He asked, amusement coloring his voice. Mina puffed her cheeks out in an adorable pout. Your friend sure knows how to get a reaction, she mumbled, before her natural cheerfulness reasserted itself in a bright smile. Her eyes drifted to their still-linked arms, focusing on the mesmerizing flow of antimatter through Izuku's veins, purple and blue energy swirling like cosmic rivers beneath his skin. Checking me out, huh? Izuku teased, earning another bright blush from the pink-skinned girl. He sighed dramatically, though his eyes sparkled with mischief. Well, are you going to hold onto my arm all day, or are we going to find our seats? Mina finally separated from him, bouncing on her feet with renewed energy. Well, I wish you luck, hot stuff, she chirped, throwing him a wink. Hopefully we get to take the exam together. With that, she skipped off toward her assigned seat, leaving behind a faint trail of acid-nullifying sparkles. Izuku shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. Some part of him, the old, quirkless Izuku, couldn't believe he'd just managed such a casual conversation with a girl. He made his way to his seat next to Katsuki, who immediately leaned over with that same sheet-eating grin. Hot stuff, huh? Seems I was right, Deku's got a girlfriend. Shut it, Izuku growled, his veins pulsing with irritation. Their banter was interrupted as Present Mike burst onto the stage in a flash of spotlights and sound effects. Welcome to today's live performance, his voice boomed through the hall. Everybody say hey. Silence met his enthusiasm, broken only by Mina's distant hey, which earned her a few strange looks. Tough crowd. Present Mike continued undeterred. Well, that's cool, my listeners. I'm here to present the guidelines of your practical exam. The screen behind him lit up with images of robots and city landscapes. This will be a 10-minute mock urban battle. You'll be experiencing what it's like to fight villains while protecting civilians. Each robot has a point value based on difficulty, from 1 to 3 points. A hand shot up from the audience, a tall boy with glasses and an extremely serious expression. Excuse me, may I ask a question? Without waiting for permission, he stood up rigidly. On the handout, there are clearly 4 types of villains listed, not 3. Such an error, if it is one, is highly unbecoming for UA, Japan's top hero academy. Present Mike grinned, pointing finger guns at the serious student. Good catch, examinee 7111. The 4th villain type is worth 0 points. Think of it as an obstacle to avoid. It's not impossible to defeat, but there's no point in trying. Izuku's eyes narrowed thoughtfully, his analytical mind already working through scenarios. His antimatter glands pulsed gently as he considered the implications. Next to him, Katsuki snorted. Bet you're already planning how to take down the big one, aren't you, nerd? Maybe, Izuku replied with a slight smirk, his purple eyes reflecting the screen's light. Could be fun. The serious student, number 7111, nodded satisfied with the explanation and sat back down, though his eyes lingered briefly on Izuku's glowing veins with barely concealed curiosity. Now then, Present Mike continued, let's talk about how you'll be sorted into your testing grounds. Remember the saying of our school, go beyond, plus ultra. As their testing locations were announced, Izuku noticed he and Katsuki were assigned to different areas. He caught Mina's eye across the room. She flashed him a thumbs up and mouthed, Ground B? Izuku checked his card and nodded, earning another bright smile from her. Good luck, Kaken, Izuku said, standing as students began to file out. Try not to destroy the whole city. Katsuki scoffed, but there was a hint of a smile on his face. Just don't die showing off to your girlfriend, nerd. Izuku's antimatter glands flared briefly as he resisted the urge to create a small explosion near Katsuki's head. Instead, he turned toward Ground B. The mock city sprawled before them, towering buildings casting long shadows across the assembled examinees. Izuku stood at the starting line, his antimatter glands pulsing with anticipation beneath his skin. Beside him, Mina bounced on her toes, her acid already beginning to drip from her fingertips. Start! Present Mike's voice boomed suddenly, catching many examinees off guard. But Izuku was already moving. His veins darkened to pitch black before the antimatter glands across his body erupted with violet light. In Izuku's eyes, the world slowed to a crawl as he absorbed the antimatter into his core, his body glowing like a constellation of purple stars. He shot forward, leaving behind a trail of distorted space as he moved faster than light itself. All the other students could see was a blur of after images, the air around the after images distorting with the power of anti-flux. A one-pointer robot rounded the corner, its red sensors barely registering his presence before Izuku's hand plunged through its chest. The antimatter coursing through his palm caused the robot to implode, collapsing in on itself with a satisfying crunch. 2 more robots appeared, and Izuku grinned, his purple eyes blazing. Hey, save some for me, Mina called out, sliding past on a stream of acid. She melted through a 3-pointer's legs while Izuku created a sphere of antimatter between his palms, launching it at a cluster of robots. The sphere expanded on impact, erasing a perfect circle of machines from existence. 12 points. Izuku called out, his voice echoing strangely as he phased through normal time. 15. Mina responded competitively, dissolving another robot with a particularly potent acid shot. Izuku spotted a group of examinees cornered by several two-pointers. Without hesitation, he redirected his course, antimatter flowing from the holes in his feet as he practically glided across the ground. His hands moved in precise arcs, creating barriers of compressed antimatter that the robots crashed into, disintegrating on contact. "You okay?" he asked the stunned examinees, his veins glowing brightly from exertion. "Why, one of them stammered, staring at the perfectly smooth holes where the robots had been. "That quirk. It's incredible." A massive crash interrupted them. The zero-pointer emerged, its colossal form blocking out the sun. While other examinees turned to flee, Izuku's eyes narrowed. He could hear Mina helping evacuate others nearby, her acid creating escape routes through debris. "Time to show off a little," Izuku muttered, focusing his antimatter into his core. His entire body began to glow, purple light pouring from every pore. With a thought, he launched himself upward, antimatter propulsion carrying him to eye level with the mechanical giant. What happened next would be talked about for years at UA. Izuku moved both palms forward, channeling a massive surge of antimatter. The air itself seemed to bend and warp around him as a beam of pure violet energy erupted from his hands. The zero-pointer didn't explode or fall. It simply ceased to exist, a perfect cylindrical hole carved through its center, edges smooth as glass. As Izuku landed gracefully beside a wide-eyed Mina, Present Mick's voice rang out, "Time's up." "That was amazing," Mina exclaimed, punching his arm playfully. "We're definitely getting in." Izuku smiled, his antimatter glands dimming as he powered down, the antimatter flowing back into his veins. "Yeah," he said softly, watching other examinees stare at the impossible hole he'd carved through space itself. "I think we just might." As the dust settled from the zero-pointer's dramatic erasure, Mina's celebration was cut short by a startling sight. She squeaked in alarm as Izuku's form began to glitch and distort, like reality itself couldn't quite decide where he should be. His left arm flickered out of existence before reappearing 3 feet to the left, suspended in midair, while his right leg seemed to phase through different points in space. The anomalies lasted only seconds before his body snapped back together, but the display left Mina wide-eyed. "Izuku, your body just went all glitchy there for a second," she said, her yellow and black eyes fixed on his form with fascination. The veins beneath his skin were glowing more intensely than before, creating intricate patterns of purple light that crawled up his arms like luminescent vines. The glow had spread further than usual, threading up his neck and across his cheeks, even tracing delicate lines beneath his eyes, making his already striking appearance even more otherworldly. "Seems I reached my limit," Izuku murmured, flexing his fingers as he watched the antimatter flow through his veins with unusual brightness. "Good thing the exam's over." He could feel his quirk settling, the cosmic energy that had been surging through him starting to calm. The hundreds of antimatter glands visible beneath his skin pulsed like dying stars, gradually dimming from their earlier intensity. Mina couldn't tear her eyes away from the display, watching as the purple glow beneath his skin shifted and swirled like aurora borealis. "It's beautiful," she breathed, unconsciously reaching out to trace one of the glowing lines on his forearm. "Does it hurt when it does that?" "Not really," Izuku replied with a small smile, watching as his veins slowly returned to their normal subtle glow. "It's more like a reminder that I'm carrying something impossible inside me." They began walking toward the exit together, their footsteps crunching over robot debris and perfectly smooth craters where antimatter had erased chunks of reality. Other examinees parted before them, whispering in awe about the boy who'd carved a hole through a zero-pointer with purple light. "Hey," Mina said suddenly, linking her arm through his as they walked, seemingly unbothered by the remaining glow of his quirk. "Want to grab a smoothie or something? You know, to celebrate potentially becoming future classmates." Izuku glanced down at their linked arms, then at Mina's hopeful smile, his purple eyes softening. The last of his antimatter glands dimmed to their usual gentle pulse, his power settling into a comfortable hum beneath his skin. As they approached the exit gates, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, almost as if the heavens themselves were celebrating their success. "Asking me out, huh?" Izuku teased before he answered her. "Yeah," he replied, feeling lighter than he had in years. "I'd like that." The gates of UA stood behind them, no longer intimidating but promising, a doorway to a future neither of them could have imagined just hours ago. And as they walked away from their first test as heroes, Izuku couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, he'd found something more than just a path to heroics. The week following the UA entrance exam crawled by with agonizing slowness. Each day seemed to stretch longer than the last as students across Japan anxiously awaited their results, refreshing inboxes and jumping at every notification. For Izuku, however, that first afternoon carried a different kind of anticipation, one that had nothing to do with acceptance letters or rankings. The smoothie shop Mina led him to was a small, colorful establishment tucked between a quiet bookstore and an over-the-top hero merchandise shop. String lights hung from the awning, twinkling softly in the late afternoon sun, and the windows were plastered with bright tropical designs that felt wildly out of place in the middle of the city. The bell above the door chimed cheerfully as they stepped inside, and the rush of cool air was a welcome relief after the lingering heat and exhaustion of the exam. "I come here all the time," Mina chirped, practically bouncing toward the counter. "They make the best smoothies in the city, and the owner has this really cool crystallization quirk that makes these amazing ice sculptures for the displays." Izuku followed at a more measured pace, still feeling the aftereffects of pushing his antimatter quirk so hard. His glands were cooling down, leaving a faint, shifting purple glow beneath his skin that caught the shop's lighting in strange, almost cosmic ways. A few customers did double takes, whispering under their breath, but for once, Izuku did not shrink under the attention. Anything felt nice not to care. The menu board above the counter was packed with options, each smoothie sporting a dramatic, hero-themed name and an equally dramatic list of ingredients. "The All Might Mango Pineapple Power-Up is really good," Mina said, noticing his eyes darting back and forth as he tried to read everything at once. "It's got this little kick of citrus that makes it perfect after quirk training." Izuku smiled, something warm blooming in his chest at her enthusiasm. "Mango pineapple it is then," he said, the soft glow in his veins pulsing faintly as Mina pumped her fist in victory. "One all-might special and one midnight berry blast," she announced, already pulling out her wallet before he could even think to object. He reached for his own out of habit, but she shot him a look and shook her head. "Nah," she said firmly. "You saved, like, half our exam group from that zero-pointer. This one's on me, hot stuff." The nickname made Izuku's expression flicker. Embarrassment flashed across his face before he could stop it, his shoulders tensing briefly before he forced himself to relax. Despite himself, a small, genuine grin tugged at his lips. He rubbed the back of his neck, green eyes flicking back to Mina with a mix of bashfulness and growing confidence. "Again with that nickname, huh?" he said, trying and failing to sound completely casual. There was a teasing edge to his voice now, something that had not been there a week ago. He tilted his head slightly, watching her carefully. "If I did not know any better," he added, grin widening just a bit, "I'd think you were into me." For a heartbeat, Mina froze. Then her face lit up in a vivid, unmistakable pink that somehow managed to deepen her already pink skin. The color spread from her cheeks all the way to the tips of her ears. "W," she sputtered, waving her hands like she could physically shoo the words away. "Don't get the wrong idea, Izuku." She turned sharply and gave his shoulder a light, flustered punch, pointedly refusing to look at him. Just shut it, okay?" Izuku blinked, clearly caught off guard by just how rattled she was. The grin on his face softened into something warmer, more amused than smug. A quiet laugh slipped out before he could stop it, and he turned his head away, his own cheeks faintly dusted pink. "Okay," he said, lifting his hands in surrender. The smile, however, stubbornly refused to leave his face. While they waited for their drinks, Mina launched into an animated recap of the exam, reenacting moments with wild gestures and exaggerated sound effects. She described how incredible his quirk had looked when he carved a perfect cylinder straight through the massive robot, her eyes shining like she was reliving it all over again. It was clear she had already moved on from his teasing, leaving Izuku quietly amused. Their smoothies arrived in tall glasses slick with condensation. Izuku's was a warm sunset gradient of orange and yellow, topped with a tiny decorative pineapple flower that made him pause for half a second before picking it up. The first sip was exactly as Mina had promised, sweet without being overwhelming, with a bright citrus kick that seemed to wake every tired muscle in his body. He sighed softly and leaned back in the booth, tension finally draining from his shoulders. "So," Mina said after a moment, settling into her seat across from him, "think we'll end up in the same class?" The question sounded casual, but Izuku caught the way her voice softened just a little. He found himself hoping the answer would be yes. There was something refreshing about Mina's presence. She had not known him as quirkless, had not seen him at his lowest. To her, he was just Izuku, the boy with glowing veins, a cosmic antimatter quirk, and a tendency to help others without thinking twice. "Hope so," he replied honestly, watching droplets of condensation slide down his glass. "It'd be nice to start UA already knowing someone who doesn't explode everything they touch." Mina burst out laughing, instantly catching the reference. "Oh my god, Explosion Boy. Is he always that intense?" "Kaken," Izuku said, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "Actually, he's calmed down a lot since." He gestured vaguely toward his faintly glowing veins. "Let's just say having your worldview completely shattered by someone you used to bully tends to change your perspective." Mina hummed, clearly intrigued. "That's kind of poetic, actually." Izuku snorted softly, taking another sip of his smoothie. "So," Mina stirred her midnight berry blast with her straw, creating a small whirlpool of purple and blue. "What was it like when your quirk first awakened?" Her yellow and black eyes held genuine curiosity, though she quickly added, "I mean, if you don't mind talking about it." Izuku's veins pulsed softly as he considered the question. He hadn't really discussed that day with anyone besides his mother and the doctors. "It was intense," he said finally, watching the condensation trail down his glass. "I was being attacked by a villain, the sludge villain, if you saw the news reports. He was trying to possess my body, I guess. Take it over." Mina's eyes widened. "That was you?" "I remember seeing something about that incident, but the details were really vague." "Yeah," Izuku nodded, his purple eyes taking on a distant look. "I was dying. The villain was suffocating me and something just snapped, like a dam breaking inside me. Suddenly there was all this power, this energy I'd never felt before. My veins started glowing and—" He held up his palm, showing her the perfectly circular hole that ran straight through it. "My body changed. The antimatter started flowing and it just tore the villain apart from the inside." "That sounds terrifying," Mina said softly, unconsciously reaching across the table to touch his hand. Her fingers traced the edge of the hole in his palm, surprisingly gentle for someone who could produce acid. "But also kind of amazing. Like your body knew exactly what it needed to do to save you." Izuku's glowing irises flashed brighter briefly at her touch, but he didn't pull away. "Yeah, it was both. The doctors said my quirk rewrote my DNA in that moment. Changed what I was on a fundamental level." He gave a small, wry smile. "Guess nearly dying was what it took to wake it up." "Well," Mina said, pulling her hand back but maintaining her bright smile, "I'm glad it did. Not the nearly dying part, but you know what I mean. You seem like you were always meant to be a hero, Quirk. Or no quirk." The sincerity in her voice made Izuku's chest tighten unexpectedly. Most people focused on how powerful his quirk was, how destructive or impressive. But Mina, she saw past that somehow. "Thanks," he said quietly, meeting her gaze. "That means a lot, actually." A comfortable silence fell between them as they finished their smoothies, broken only by the gentle hum of the shop's air conditioning and distant conversation from other customers. The afternoon sun had begun to dip, casting long shadows through the shop's tropical-themed windows and making Izuku's glowing veins stand out even more prominently against his skin. We should do this again, Mina said suddenly, her voice carrying a hint of hopeful nervousness. You know, once we get our acceptance letters. Because we're definitely both getting in. Izuku felt a smile tugging at his lips. Yeah, he agreed, standing as they prepared to leave. I'd like that. He paused, then added with a touch of his earlier teasing, it's a date then? The way Mina's face flushed pink again, somehow darker than her natural skin tone, was absolutely worth the punch she landed on his arm. You're terrible, she exclaimed, but she was laughing, and when they stepped out into the evening air, she didn't protest when he offered to walk her to her train station. The walk to the train station was filled with comfortable conversation, the setting sun casting long shadows that made Izuku's glowing veins seem even more ethereal. Street lights began flickering to life one by one, their gentle illumination mixing with the purple light emanating from beneath his skin. You know, Mina said thoughtfully, her hands clasped behind her back as they walked, your quirk is probably the prettiest destructive quirk I've ever seen. It's like carrying galaxies under your skin. Izuku glanced down at his arms, watching the antimatter flow through his veins like liquid starlight. Prettier than your acid? He asked with a small smirk. Hey, my acid is gorgeous, thank you very much. Mina protested, creating a small shower of sparkles from her fingertips to prove her point. But yeah, even prettier than my acid. They reached the station steps just as the evening rush was beginning to thin out. Mina turned to face him, rocking slightly on her heels as if hesitant to leave. Text me when you get your letter, she asked, pulling out her phone. We should celebrate together when we both get in. When, not if. Izuku raised an eyebrow, but he was already reaching for his own phone. Obviously when. Mina declared with absolute certainty as they exchanged numbers. Did you see yourself during that exam? It would be crazy not to accept you. As if to emphasize her point, one of Izuku's antimatter glands pulsed particularly brightly, casting a brief purple glow over both their faces. Mina giggled, and before Izuku could react, she stepped forward and pressed a quick kiss to his cheek. See you at you, hot stuff, she called out, already darting down the station steps, leaving Izuku frozen in place, his veins glowing brighter than they had all afternoon. It didn't take long before the train arrived at Mizudafu, as Izuku made his way off the train, beginning his walk home. He briefly looked at his phone, seeing a text and a missed call from his mom, the text asking where he was. His sweat dropped as he realized he stayed out longer than he had originally planned, that after-exam date with Mina was not something he had expected to happen. He stood there for a moment, one hand touching his cheek where her lips had been, a soft smile spreading across his face. Above him, the first stars of evening were beginning to appear, twinkling like the antimatter flowing through his veins. His phone buzzed, and he looked down to see a message from Mina. That smoothie shop date was fun. Next time it's your treat. Izuku's grin widened as he typed back, deal. After we get our acceptance letters. The message sent with a soft chime, and he slipped his phone back into his pocket, making his way down to the train platform. The evening crowd had thinned somewhat, but there were still plenty of commuters heading home, their tired faces illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lighting of the station. As he boarded the train bound for Mizudafu, Izuku found himself unconsciously tracking the curious stares of other passengers. Some tried to be subtle about it, stealing quick glances when they thought he wasn't looking. Others were more obvious, openly staring at the network of purple veins that traced patterns beneath his skin. A small child pointed and asked his mother loudly why. That boy has glowing lines, making the mother hurriedly shush him. But for once, the attention didn't bother him. Izuku had grown oddly comfortable with these looks over the past few months. They were different from the pitying or mocking stares he'd received when he was quirkless. These were looks of curiosity, sometimes awe, occasionally fear, but never disgust. The antimatter flowing through his veins had become as much a part of his identity as his green hair or his analytical mind. He gripped one of the ceiling handles as the train swayed, the motion causing the purple light beneath his skin to shift and ripple like liquid starlight. His veins had dimmed to their normal brightness now that his quirk had fully settled from the exam, but they still cast faint shadows on the train's floor, creating abstract patterns that danced with each movement. The journey to Mizudafu passed in a blur of stations and automated announcements. When his stop finally came, Izuku stepped onto the familiar platform, the evening air carrying the scent of approaching spring. As he began his walk home through the quiet suburban streets, his phone buzzed again in his pocket. Pulling it out, he saw a missed call from his mom and a text that made him wince slightly. "Izuku, sweetie, where are you? Everything okay? Dinner's getting cold." He checked the time and felt his stomach drop, 7:45 p.m. He'd completely lost track of time at the smoothie shop with Mina, their conversation flowing so naturally that hours had slipped by unnoticed. The impromptu date. Was it a date? His cheeks still tingled where she'd kissed it, had definitely not been part of his original post-exam plans. "Mom's going to have questions," he muttered to himself, watching his antimatter glands pulse with mild anxiety. He could already imagine her reaction, first worry, then relief, then that knowing look she got whenever she sensed there might be a girl involved. The thought made his veins glow a fraction brighter with embarrassment. Izuku pushed down his nerves as he approached their apartment door, fishing his key out of his wallet. The antimatter glands beneath his skin pulsed with growing anxiety as he unlocked the door, the familiar clicks seeming unusually loud in the quiet hallway. He stepped inside, kicking off his shoes in the entryway before freezing mid-movement. There, standing in the hallway with her hands planted firmly on her hips, was his mother, and she was wearing that smile. That knowing, motherly smirk that told him she'd already figured out exactly why he was late. "So," Inko drew out the word playfully, her green eyes twinkling with mischief. "Why were you gone so long, Izuku?" The question was innocent enough, but her tone made his veins glow brighter with embarrassment. Izuku pinched the bridge of his nose, the purple light from his antimatter glands and pulsing veins under his eyes casting shifting shadows across his face. He could already feel the interrogation coming. "I went to a smoothie shop with someone from the exam," he said carefully, trying to keep the information as minimal as possible. "Oh." Inko's smirk widened, and she leaned forward slightly. "Was it a girl?" The way she asked made it clear she already knew the answer. Izuku's head dropped in defeat, his shoulders slumping in resignation. "Yes. It was a girl." Inko's squeal of delight made him wince. "My baby boy went on a date." She rushed forward, pulling him into a tight hug despite their height difference. "Tell me everything. What's her name? What's her quirk? Is she nice? Did you have fun?" "Mom." Izuku protested weakly, though he couldn't help the small smile tugging at his lips. "It wasn't. I mean, we just..." He paused, remembering the kiss on his cheek, and his veins suddenly glowed brighter. "Her name is Mina. She has an acid quirk, and yes, she's really nice." Inko pulled back, holding him at arm's length as she studied his face. Her eyes caught the way his veins pulsed with a warmer glow when he said Mina's name, and her smile softened. "You're blushing, sweetie. Your quirk makes your veins and glands glow brighter when you're flustered," Inko said, pointing out an observation she's made over the few months Izuku's had his quirk. "They do not." Izuku protested, even as the glow intensified further, betraying his embarrassment. The hundreds of tiny antimatter nodes visible beneath his skin seemed to dance with his heightened emotions, creating a constellation of purple light that only made his mother's knowing look grow stronger. "The food's still warm," Inko said, finally taking mercy on him as she steered him toward the kitchen. "You can tell me all about this Mina girl over dinner. Like how she managed to keep my punctual son out so late after his entrance exam." Izuku groaned, but allowed himself to be guided to the table. About quirks and the exam and... He trailed off, remembering how easily conversation had flowed between them, how natural it had felt. "She wasn't scared of my quirk," he added softly. "She said it was pretty." Inko's eyes softened at that, understanding the weight of those words. After all the years of being quirkless, after the dramatic and dangerous awakening of his power, having someone see beauty in his antimatter meant more than just a casual compliment. "Well then," she said, serving him a plate of katsudon, "I definitely need to hear more about this girl who can make my son's antimatter glands light up like a Christmas tree." "Mom." Izuku protested again, but he was smiling, the purple glow beneath his skin warm and content. Inko set her chopsticks down, leaning forward with eager interest. So, tell me more about her. What does she look like? You mentioned an acid quirk. Izuku poked at his katsudon, his antimatter glands pulsing softly as he thought about how to describe Mina. She's different. Like me. A mutant type, he began, a small smile forming. Her skin is pink, and she has these cute little horns and her eyes. He paused, realizing he'd said cute out loud, his veins glowing brighter. Her eyes are actually kind of like mine now, yellow irises with black sclera. We joked about it at the exam. Oh. Inko's eyes sparkled with interest. So you both have unusual eyes? That's adorable. What else? Mom. Izuku groaned, but continued anyway. Her quirk lets her produce and control acid. During the exam, she was amazing, melting through robots while protecting other examinees. She can even use it to slide around, like skating. His voice took on that familiar analytical tone he got when discussing quirks, but there was something softer in it now, something that made Inko's smile widen. She sounds wonderful, sweetie. And clearly she thinks you're wonderful too, if she asked you out for smoothies right after the exam. Actually, Izuku's veins flickered nervously. She kind of kissed me on the cheek at the train station. The squeal Inko let out could probably be heard 3 floors down. My baby boy got his first kiss. She clasped her hands together, tears of joy already forming in her eyes. Oh, Izuku. I knew this day would come. My sweet boy, finding his future wife at the UA entrance exam. Izuku's entire face flushed red, his antimatter glands glowing so brightly they cast purple shadows on the ceiling. It was just a peck on the cheek. We barely know each other. Don't start planning the wedding. But Izuku. Inko was practically bouncing in her seat now. It's perfect. Both of you with mutation quirks, both going to be heroes. Your children would be so cute. Maybe they'd have pink skin with glowing purple veins, or, I'm going to my room. Izuku announced suddenly, standing up with his face burning and his quirk practically lighting up the entire kitchen. But despite his embarrassment, he couldn't quite hide his smile. We don't even know if we got into UA yet. Oh, please, Inko waved off his concern. After what you told me about the exam, there's no way either of you didn't get in. And then you can go on proper dates, and I can meet her, and... Good night, Mom. Izuku called out, practically fleeing to his room, his mother's delighted laughter following him down the hall. Once in the safety of his bedroom, Izuku flopped onto his bed, staring at his ceiling as his antimatter glands slowly dimmed to their normal glow. Izuku lay on his bed with his pillow half over his face, listening to his mom's muffled humming drift down the hallway. After a moment, he pulled the pillow away and stared up at the ceiling, his heart still beating faster than it had any right to. A future wife, seriously, he muttered, though the corners of his mouth refused to stop twitching. His phone buzzed again in his hand. Mina. Made it home. Still thinking about that awesome antimatter show you put on at the exam. Can't wait to see what else you can do. Izuku rolled onto his side, hugging the pillow to his chest as he typed back, thumbs hesitating for half a second before moving. Izuku, I'm glad you got home safe. And it wasn't really a show, I was just trying not to get crushed. But thanks. I had a really good time today. He set the phone down on his chest, staring at it like it might explode. A few seconds later, it buzzed again. Mina. Same. Best post-near-death hangout ever. Also, your mom didn't freak out that you were late, did she? Izuku snorted softly and pushed himself up to sit on the edge of his bed. He kicked off his shoes, lining them up neatly by the wall out of pure habit. Izuku. She absolutely did. But in a happy way? I think she already thinks we're getting married. There was a pause. Long enough that Izuku started to panic a little. Mina. What? Okay, but that's kinda hilarious. My parents would do the same if they knew I went out with a cute hero boy after the exam. Izuku's face heated instantly. He buried it briefly in his hands before daring to look at the screen again. Izuku. Cute. You're exaggerating. Across town, Mina was sprawled on her bed, still in her exam clothes, boots kicked off somewhere near the door. She grinned at her phone, tail flicking lazily behind her as she typed. Mina. Am I? Glowy veins, heroic personality, saves people without thinking? Sounds cute to me. Plus, you blush super easily. That's adorable. Izuku let out a tiny, strangled noise and fell backward onto his bed, staring at the ceiling again. Izuku, you're impossible. But thanks. That means a lot. He sat up again, swung his legs over the side of the bed, and stood, stretching as the day finally started to catch up with him. His muscles ached, and his eyelids felt heavy. Izuku, I'm gonna get ready for bed. Today really took it out of me. But we can keep texting if you want. Mina, yeah. I'm just lying here anyway. Go brush those hero teeth, Midoriya. He smiled at that and headed for the bathroom. As he brushed his teeth and washed his face, he kept glancing at his phone on the sink whenever it buzzed. Mina, so what's your room like? Bet it's full of hero stuff. Izuku, maybe. Please. Definitely. There are All Might posters. And notebooks. A lot of notebooks. Not as much as there used to be though. He glanced back toward his room, mentally picturing the stacks of scribbled analyses. Mina, that's so on-brand it hurts. I want to see them someday. Your super secret hero brain notes. Izuku rinsed his mouth and dried his face, feeling oddly nervous at the idea. Izuku, maybe when we're at UA, if you really want to. He paused, then added. Izuku, I'd like to see your room too. On Mina's end, she rolled onto her stomach, kicking her feet in the air. Mina, deal. Mine's way messier though, just warning you. Izuku chuckled quietly as he walked back into his room, setting his phone on his desk while he changed into pajamas. When he picked it up again, there were 2 new notifications. One from Mina, and one from a very familiar name. Katsuki. Leonard. You alive? Izuku blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected to hear from Katsuki tonight. He quickly typed back. Izuku. Yeah, I'm fine. Just got home a bit ago. What's up, Kaken? The reply came almost instantly. Katsuki. You disappeared after the exam. Thought you got yourself blown up or something. I'm sure you did great out there, Deku. Izuku stared at the words, sweat rolling down his forehead, his glowing purple irises staring at his screen for a moment. That might have been the closest thing to a compliment Katsuki had ever texted him. Izuku. Thanks, that means a lot, actually. I'm sure you did great in the exam. There was a longer pause this time. Katsuki. Tisich, obviously. We're both getting in. Don't slack off just because you got some fancy new power, got it? Izuku smiled softly. Izuku. I won't. I promise. Another buzz. Mina again. Mina. Who you texting? Don't tell me you've already got another date. Izuku laughed under his breath and flopped back onto his bed. Izuku. No. It's just Bakugo. He was checking in his own way. Mina. Explosion boy? Wow, character development. Guess getting your butt handed to you really does change folks. Izuku thought about that for a moment. Izuku. Yeah, I think it does. He shifted onto his side, pulling his blanket up over himself. The room was quiet now, the lights off except for the soft glow of his phone screen. Izuku. I'm really glad we met today, Mina. Before the exam, I was terrified. But you made everything after that feel a lot less scary. There was a pause. Mina. Same here. I was nervous too, but hanging out with you was the best part of my day. I keep replaying that moment at the station in my head. Izuku's chest tightened. Izuku. Me too. Mina. Hey Midoriya. When we get into you, let's stick together, okay? No matter what class we're in. Izuku didn't hesitate. Izuku. Yeah. I'd like that. Good night, Mina. A few seconds later. Mina. Good night, Izuku. Izuku set his phone on the bedside table, the screen's glow fading to darkness as he settled back against his pillows. His room was quiet save for the distant sounds of his mother's excited phone conversation and the gentle hum of the city outside his window. The events of the day played through his mind like a movie, the entrance exam, the raw power of his quirk as he erased that massive robot, and of course, Meeting Mina. A year ago, he would have been staring at his ceiling, crying over his quirkless status, dreaming of a future that seemed impossible. Now, the same ceiling was painted in soft purple light from his veins, a constant reminder of how much had changed. His quirk awakening had transformed everything: his body, his confidence, his entire future. The scared, bullied kid who used to hide in the back of the classroom felt like a stranger now. "What a day," he murmured to himself, turning onto his side and watching the shadows his quirk cast dance across his wall. The memory of Mina's kiss on his cheek made his veins pulse briefly brighter, and he couldn't help but smile. That wouldn't have happened to the old Izuku, the quirkless Deku who could barely speak to anyone, let alone a pretty girl. His eyes grew heavy as exhaustion from the exam finally caught up with him. The antimatter flowing through his veins settled into a peaceful rhythm, like a cosmic lullaby. As consciousness began to fade, Izuku's last thoughts weren't of anxiety over Yue's decision or worry about the future. Instead, he thought of pink skin, acid slides, and smoothies shared on an unexpected afternoon. The teacher's lounge at Yue was quiet at this hour, most of the staff having gone home for the day. Toshinori Yagi sat hunched over his desk, his gaunt form illuminated by the soft glow of his computer screen. Student files were spread across his workspace, but his attention was fixed on one in particular: Izuku Midoriya's registry entry. The photograph attached to the file made him frown slightly. It showed a timid-looking boy with messy green hair and ordinary green eyes, nothing like the powerful young man who had carved a hole through a zero-pointer with antimatter just a week ago. The stark difference between the pre-quirk photo and the reality of the boy now was jarring. They haven't gotten a new photo yet. Strange, Toshinori muttered to himself, scanning the quirk information section. The details about anti-flux were clinical, scientific, lacking any mention of the raw cosmic power he'd witnessed firsthand during the sludge villain incident. "You haven't met the students, and yet you are already playing favorites?" The sudden voice made Toshinori jump, papers scattering across his desk as he whirled around to face Shota Aizawa. The underground hero stood in the doorway, his capture weapon coiled loosely around his neck and his bloodshot eyes fixed on the file Toshinori had been examining. "Aizawa-kun," Toshinori acknowledged, trying to slow his startled heartbeat. "I wasn't expecting anyone else to be here this late." Aizawa's eyes narrowed as he approached the desk, looking at the screen, a detailed report of Izuku's entrance exam performance. "Midoriya," he read aloud, his tone maintaining that perpetual exhausted drawl. "The antimatter kid. You've reviewed his file?" Toshinori asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "I've reviewed everyone's files," Aizawa replied flatly, dark eyes scanning the document. "But this one's interesting. A late quirk awakening that literally rewrote his DNA. The kind of power that could level cities if not properly controlled." He looked away from the monitor, fixing Toshinori with a knowing look. "The kind of power that attracts attention. Like that of the symbol of peace, perhaps." Toshinori met Aizawa's gaze steadily. They both knew what the underground hero was implying. "I was there," he admitted quietly, "when his quirk first manifested. I've never seen anything like it." Aizawa hummed noncommittally, but his eyes held a sharp intelligence that belied his exhausted appearance. "Just remember, all might at you. Potential means nothing without the proper guidance. If he ends up in my class." He turned toward the door, his capture weapon shifting slightly with the movement. "I'll judge him by his actions, not his power." As Aizawa's footsteps faded down the hallway, Toshinori looked back at Izuku's outdated photo. The boy in the picture looked scared, uncertain. But the young man he'd met, the one who'd turned antimatter into art during the entrance exam, that was someone else entirely. "Don't worry, young Midoriya," he murmured, finally closing the file. "Yue will help you become the hero you were always meant to be." The morning sun filtered through the apartment windows, casting warm light across the living room where Inko was arranging snacks on the coffee table. A knock at the door echoed through the apartment, making her smile knowingly. "Izuku, get the door please," she called out. Izuku emerged from his room, still stretching away the last remnants of sleep. His acceptance letter sat unopened on his desk. He'd been adamant about waiting to open it with the others, despite how the anticipation made his antimatter glands pulse with nervous energy. He reached for the door handle, completely unprepared for what happened next. A blur of pink crashed into him the moment the door opened, nearly knocking him off his feet. Mina's arms wrapped around him in an enthusiastic embrace, her excited squeal muffled against his chest. Behind her, Katsuki leaned against the doorframe, an amused smirk playing on his face as he watched Izuku stumble. "Geez, Mina. Careful." Izuku laughed, returning the hug despite his surprise. His veins glowed a bit brighter at the contact, something that didn't escape Katsuki's notice, judging by his widening smirk. Mina giggled as she pulled back, her yellow and black eyes bright with excitement. "Sorry. I'm just so nervous about the letters. Did you open yours yet?" She bounced on her toes, her own letter clutched tightly in one hand. "Not yet," Izuku replied, watching as she practically skipped into the apartment. "Was waiting for you guys." Katsuki finally entered, nodding respectfully to Inko. "Auntie," he greeted, his usual gruff tone softened slightly. "Thanks for having us over." "Of course, Katsuki." Inko beamed, secretly sliding her phone back into her pocket. She'd managed to capture several photos of Mina's surprise hug, already mentally planning to add them to her growing album of Izuku and Mina moments. "I made spicy snacks just how you like them." Mina had already made herself comfortable on the couch, patting the space beside her as she looked at Izuku expectantly. "Come on, hot stuff. Let's see if we made it." Izuku's face flushed at the nickname, especially with his mother present. Inko's delighted gasp and Katsuki's snort of laughter didn't help matters. "Let me get my letter," he mumbled, hurrying to his room as his veins betrayed his embarrassment with their brightening glow. "You're not subtle, raccoon eyes," he heard Katsuki say as he retrieved his letter, followed by Mina's defensive, "I don't know what you're talking about." When he returned to the living room, Mina had claimed one end of the couch while Katsuki lounged in the armchair, both holding their unopened letters. Inko stood nearby with her phone suspiciously ready, probably planning to document the whole thing. "Ready?" Izuku asked, sitting beside Mina and trying to ignore how she immediately scooted closer. "Born ready," Mina declared, while Katsuki just grunted an affirmative. The three opened their letters at the same time, 3 small holographic discs falling out and immediately snapping together, combining into one disc, something UA had designed in the case of a friend's opening their letters at the same time. As the hologram flickered to life, All Might, in a yellow striped suit appeared, preparing to announce the results. The crisp sound of tearing envelopes filled the room as all 3 students opened their letters simultaneously. 3 metallic discs slipped out, each bearing UA's insignia. Before anyone could react, the discs began to hover, drawn together by some unseen force until they connected with a soft click. A beam of light erupted upward, forming into a large holographic display that filled the living room with blue light. "I am here as a projection." All Might's booming voice filled the room as his image appeared, dressed in a garish yellow pinstriped suit. His signature grin was impossibly wide as he continued, "Young heroes, you are watching this together, which means you share a bond of friendship. How wonderful!" Katsuki rolled his eyes while Mina bounced excitedly in her seat, unconsciously gripping Izuku's arm. Inko had her phone ready, recording everything. "Now then, let's start with the results," All Might declared, pulling out a sheet of paper. "Young Midoriya, not only did you pass, but you achieved the highest score in UA entrance exam history." The hologram shifted, showing footage from the exam. Izuku watched himself standing before the massive zero-pointer, his veins and antimatter glands glowing like a constellation beneath his skin. On screen, he moved his palm forward, antimatter swirling around his hand before condensing into a sphere the size of a baseball. "Witness this display of power and control," All Might's voice narrated as the recording showed Izuku launching the sphere. The moment it left his hand, it began to expand rapidly, growing to massive proportions. The zero-pointer didn't even have time to react before the antimatter sphere engulfed it, erasing it from existence with surgical precision. 80 villain points for combat efficiency. All Might announced. But that's not all. Your actions in protecting other examinees, your strategic use of your quirk to create escape routes, and your willingness to put yourself in harm's way to help others earned you an additional 140 hero points. A total of 220 points, the highest score ever recorded. Mina squealed, throwing her arms around Izuku while Katsuki let out a impressed teeth. The hologram continued, showing clips of Izuku using controlled bursts of antimatter to clear paths for other examinees, creating platforms for those who had fallen, and systematically taking down robots while ensuring no other students were in the blast radius. Young Midoriya, All Might's voice grew more serious, more proud. You showed not just power but the true spirit of heroism. Welcome to UA's Hero Course, Class 1A. The projection shifted, ready to announce the next student's results, but Izuku barely heard it. He was still processing the numbers, 220 points. He'd not only passed, he'd shattered every record. His veins pulsed with joy as Mina hugged him tighter, and even Katsuki was wearing what could almost be called a proud smile. Inko was openly crying now, her camera forgotten as she watched her son's dream become reality. The boy who had once been quirkless had just made UA history. The hologram flickered as All Might's image returned, his grin somehow growing even wider. Now then, young Ishido. The projection shifted to show Mina sliding gracefully on her acid, weaving between robots with acrobatic precision. Your innovative use of your quirk for mobility and combat showed great promise. 45 villain points. The footage continued, showing Mina creating acid barriers to protect other examinees, melting through debris to free trapped students, and using her quirk to create safe paths through the chaos. And an impressive 50 hero points for your rescue efforts. Welcome to Class 1A. Mina's excited shriek nearly deafened Izuku, but he couldn't help grinning as she bounced in place. We're in the same class, she exclaimed, her yellow and black eyes shining with joy. And finally, All Might continued, young Bakugo. The projection changed to show Katsuki in action, his explosions lighting up the exam field like fireworks. 77 villain points for your overwhelming combat prowess. The footage showed him systematically destroying robot after robot with tactical precision. While your aggressive approach was concerning, you showed situational awareness in ensuring your explosions didn't endanger other examinees. 35 hero points. You too will join Class 1A. Of course I did, Katsuki smirked, but there was genuine pride in his voice. Third place isn't bad, considering I was competing with someone who can literally erase matter from existence. Wait, Mina perked up, who got second? Some extra named Yaoyorozu, Katsuki shrugged. Creation quirk. Got like 150 points total. The hologram of All Might raised his hand in a final salute. You three have shown incredible potential. Report to UA in 2 weeks' time for orientation. Plus Ultra. The projection faded, leaving the 3 discs to separate and float back to their respective owners. For a moment, the room was quiet as the reality sank in. They had all made it, and into the same class no less. Group hug. Mina suddenly announced, grabbing both boys before they could protest. Katsuki made a show of struggling, but didn't actually try to break free as Mina squeezed them both. This calls for celebration. Inko declared, wiping happy tears from her eyes. I'll order from that nice restaurant down the street, the one with the extra spicy options Katsuki likes. As Inko went to make the call, Mina finally released her captives. Can you believe it? She beamed, practically glowing with excitement. We're going to be heroes. Izuku felt warmth bloom in his chest as he looked between his childhood friend and the girl who had so quickly become important to him. His quirk hummed contentedly beneath his skin, and for once, the future looked absolutely perfect. Yeah, he agreed softly, returning Mina's bright smile. We are. The celebration quickly turned into an impromptu dinner party as Inko bustled around the kitchen, adding her own home-cooked sides to complement the takeout she'd ordered. The apartment filled with the mixed aromas of spicy takeout and Inko's cooking, creating an atmosphere of warmth and celebration. So, Mina said, perched on a Kitchen countered despite Inko's half-hearted protests. 220 points, huh? Guess I'm friends with Yue's new golden boy. She playfully nudged Izuku with her foot as he leaned against the counter beside her. Just friends? Katsuki muttered under his breath, loud enough for only Izuku to hear, earning him a glare that made his veins pulse brighter. It's not that big a deal, Izuku tried to downplay it, but his small smile betrayed his pride. I just did what felt right. What felt right was erasing a building-sized robot from existence? Mina giggled. Your definition of not a big deal needs work, hot stuff. The doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of their food. As Inko went to answer it, Katsuki spoke up from his position at the kitchen table. Leonard, we should probably warn Raccoon Eyes about your quirks. Side effects. Mina's eyes lit up with curiosity. Side effects? Like the glowing? More like the reality-bending sheet that happens when he loses control, Katsuki explained, a hint of seriousness entering his voice. Remember that glitching after the exam? That's just the tip of the iceberg. Kaken, Izuku started, but Katsuki cut him off. She needs to know that, especially if she's going to be, he smirked, close to you. Before Izuku could respond, Inko returned with bags of food, effectively pausing the conversation. But Mina's curious glances told him this discussion wasn't over. As they settled around the table, the food spread out before them, Izuku caught Mina's eye. She smiled, soft and understanding, and mouthed later, to him. Somehow, that simple gesture made his anxiety about sharing the more dangerous aspects of his quirk fade slightly. To Yue's newest heroes. Inko raised her glass in a toast, beaming at the three students. And to new beginnings. The dining room was filled with warmth and laughter as they ate, the mix of takeout and Inko's cooking creating a perfect celebration feast. Mina had somehow ended up seated right next to Izuku, their shoulders occasionally brushing as they reached for dishes. Katsuki sat across from them, alternating between devouring the spiciest dishes known to man and making subtle jabs about their obvious attraction. So, Mina said between bites, her yellow and black eyes bright with curiosity, what did Katsuki mean about reality-bending side effects? I've only seen the glitching that one time after the exam. Izuku set down his chopsticks, exchanging a glance with Katsuki. The atmosphere shifted slightly, becoming more serious. Inko's hand found her son's shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze of encouragement. My quirk. Izuku began carefully. It's not just about producing and controlling antimatter. The doctors say it fundamentally changed what I am on a molecular level. Sometimes, when I push too hard or lose control, things get strange. Strange how? Mina asked softly, turning in her chair to face him fully. Show her, Katsuki suggested, his usual aggressive tone tempered with understanding. The safe version. Izuku nodded, holding out his hand palm up on the table. His veins darkened momentarily before his antimatter glands began to glow, creating that familiar constellation effect beneath his skin. But then something else happened. The air around his hand began to distort, the veins in his palm lit up like reality itself was bending around him. Small objects near his hand, chopsticks, napkins, even drops of spilled sauce, began to float and distort, caught in the warped space, as the tiny pea-sized hole in his palm began to glow a faint purple. This is just a fraction of it, Izuku explained, his voice quiet. When it gets bad, when I really lose control, I start to phase in and out of reality. Parts of me exist in multiple places at once. Sometimes things around me just cease to exist without me even trying to erase them. During training, I once accidentally created a space where time moved differently. Kaken was stuck moving in slow motion for almost an hour. It was weird, Katsuki confirmed, absently rubbing his arm as if remembering. Like being trapped in jello, but worse. Mina reached out, hesitating only briefly before placing her hand in Izuku's still outstretched one. The distortions swirled around their joined hands, but didn't harm her. Does it hurt? She asked. When you lose control like that? Sometimes, Izuku admitted. Like being torn apart and put back together wrong. The doctors think it's because my body is constantly fighting between matter and antimatter, between existing and not existing. That's why he needs people watching his back, Katsuki added, unusually serious. In case he starts to lose it, someone to ground him, to pull him back before he accidentally erases himself from existence. Inko made a small, distressed sound at that. It was clearly still difficult for her to hear about the dangers of her son's quirk. But Mina's expression remained determined, her grip on Izuku's hand tightening. Well, good thing he'll have us then, she said firmly. Both of us. Right, Katsuki? Katsuki's surprise at being included showed only briefly before he smirked. Obviously. Can't let this nerd disappear himself before I beat him in a fair fight. The tension broke as Izuku laughed, the distortions around his hand fading as his quirk settled. You're still hung up on that first fight? When I knocked you into the classroom wall? That was a cheap shot and you know it, Deku. As they fell into familiar banter, Mina didn't let go of Izuku's hand. If anything, she scooted her chair closer, her thumb tracing small circles over his antimatter glands. The gesture was so casual, so accepting, that Izuku felt something in his chest tighten with emotion. You're not scared, he asked quietly, while Katsuki was distracted arguing with Inko about having fourths. Mina looked at him, her yellow and black eyes meeting his purple ones without hesitation. Of you? Never. She smiled, that bright, genuine smile that made his quirk hum happily beneath his skin. Your power is part of who you are, Izuku. And I like who you are. The simple honesty in her words made his veins glow brighter, earning a giggle from her. Before he could respond, Katsuki's voice cut in. If you two are done having a moment, Auntie's bringing out dessert. And Deku, your face is literally lighting up the whole room. Shut up, Kaken, Izuku muttered, but he was smiling and he didn't let go of Mina's hand. As evening settled over Mizudafu, the celebration moved to the living room. Go ahead. Brought out photo albums, much to Izuku's mortification, and was happily sharing stories with Mina, who sat cross-legged on the floor, eagerly absorbing every embarrassing childhood detail. And this one, Inko said, pointing to a photo of a tiny Izuku in an All Might onesie, was his favorite pajamas. He wouldn't take them off for a week. Mom. Izuku groaned from his position on the couch, but Mina's delighted laughter made it hard to actually be annoyed. She'd somehow ended up leaning back against his legs as she looked through the albums, and the casual contact felt. Right? You were adorable, she insisted, turning another page. Oh, is this you and Katsuki? The photo showed two small boys covered in mud, grinning widely at the camera. Little Katsuki was making explosion shapes with his hands while little Izuku held up an All Might action figure. We were 4, Katsuki said from his sprawled position in the armchair. Deku insisted we had to save All Might from the mud villain. By jumping into the mud pit headfirst, Inko added dryly. I never did get those stains out. The room filled with warm laughter, and Izuku found himself marveling at how natural this felt. Katsuki, his childhood friend turned bully turned friend again, lounging comfortably in his living room. Mina, this bright, unexpected addition to his life, fitting so perfectly into their dynamic. His mother, happier than he'd seen her in years. The sky outside had grown dark, stars beginning to peek through the city's light pollution. Mina tilted her head back to look at Izuku, her yellow eyes reflecting the purple glow of his veins. We should probably head home soon, she said, though she made no move to get up. I'll walk you to the station, Izuku offered immediately, earning knowing looks from both his mother and Katsuki. Such a gentleman, Mina teased, finally standing and stretching. Thanks for having us over, Mrs. Midoriya. The food was amazing. Yeah, thanks Auntie, Katsuki added, pushing himself up from the armchair. Still the best spicy cooking around. As they gathered their things, acceptance letters carefully tucked away in bags, Inko pulled each of them into a hug, including Katsuki who pretended to protest but returned it anyway. I'm so proud of all of you, she said, wiping happy tears from her eyes. My future heroes. The night air was cool as they stepped outside, the street quiet save for distant city sounds. Katsuki split off first, heading toward his neighborhood with a casual wave and a, "Don't do anything stupid, nerds." Walking to the station with Mina felt different this time, more settled, more certain. Their hands found each other naturally, fingers intertwining as they walked beneath streetlights that seemed to pulse in time with Izuku's quirk. "Today was perfect," Mina said softly as they reached the station steps. "Getting into UA, being in the same class, meeting your mom. All of it." "Yeah," Izuku agreed, feeling braver than usual as he squeezed her hand. "It really was." This time, when Mina rose on her tiptoes to kiss his cheek, he was ready for it. He turned slightly, catching the corner of her mouth with his. It was brief, barely more than a brush of lips, but it made his entire body light up like a purple Christmas tree. Mina's face flushed darker pink, but her smile was radiant. "See you at your hot stuff," she whispered, before disappearing down the steps with a skip in her step. Izuku stood there for a moment, touching his lips and grinning like an idiot. His phone buzzed, probably his mother asking if Mina got to the station safely, or Katsuki making fun of him, or maybe even Mina herself. But for now, he just looked up at the stars, his quirk humming contentedly beneath his skin. In 2 weeks, they'd start at UA. In 2 weeks, they'd begin their journey to becoming heroes. But right now, in this moment, Izuku Midoriya was already exactly where he needed to be. The 2 weeks before UA classes began passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation, the days bleeding together until Izuku could barely remember what it felt like to wake up without a knot of nerves twisting in his stomach. Now, standing in front of his bedroom mirror, the reality of it all finally settled in. He tugged at his tie again, fingers moving on instinct even though it already sat perfectly straight. His reflection stared back at him, familiar and yet completely foreign. Purple hair framed his face, darker near the roots and lighter where it caught the morning sun. It still felt strange not seeing green there, strange not seeing anything normal, really. His eyes glowed faintly violet, the light pulsing behind black sclera like distant stars trapped behind glass. Even when he tried to relax, the glow never fully went away. And then there were the veins, thin, branching lines beneath his skin, emitting a soft, otherworldly light that traced his neck, hands, and forearms. Proof. Constant, undeniable proof that he wasn't just some quirkless kid anymore. He exhaled slowly, placing both palms on the edge of his desk and leaning forward. "I actually made it." His phone buzzed sharply, snapping him out of his thoughts. The vibration rattled against the wooden surface, and he didn't even need to check the screen to know who it was. Mina, probably sending another caps lock-laden message about being early, or how she couldn't believe this was really happening, or some ridiculous selfie she'd taken at the station. He smiled despite himself. They'd barely stopped talking since the acceptance letters arrived. Texts turned into calls. Calls turned into late-night conversations that stretched far longer than either of them admitted. They talked about everything: training, quirks, fears, dreams. Mina had an effortless way of pulling things out of him he didn't even realize he'd been holding back. Every time her name popped up on his phone, he could feel it, his antimatter glands humming a little brighter beneath his skin, veins responding before his brain could catch up. Katsuki had noticed immediately during training. "You light up like a DMN reactor every time your phone goes off," he'd sneered, sparks crackling from his palms. "It's annoying." Izuku flushed just thinking about it. "Izuku!" Inko called from the kitchen, her voice warm and sing-song. "You'll be late if you don't leave soon." "I'm coming," he called back, straightening up and grabbing his blazer. "And Mina texted me," Inko added casually, far too casually. "She's waiting at the station." Izuku froze mid-step. "Mom." Head snapped toward the doorway, eyes glowing brighter as his heart skipped. He spun back to his desk, staring at his phone like it had betrayed him personally. "Why is she texting you?" he demanded, voice cracking just a little. Inko laughed, the sound light and unapologetic. "Oh, we've been chatting. She's such a sweet girl, Izuku. Very polite. Very enthusiastic." Izuku's veins flared brighter, embarrassment flooding through him like a surge. That's not why are you chatting?" "Because she asked how you were when you didn't reply for 20 whole minutes," Inko said, as if that explained everything. Naturally, I reassured her. Izuku made a strangled noise. You what? And did you know, Inko continued, clearly enjoying herself now, that she keeps all the pictures I sent her of you as a baby? Silence. Absolute, soul-crushing silence. She what? Izuku lunged for his bag, nearly knocking over his chair as violet light surged through his veins like an alarm system. His face burned hotter than any antimatter reaction he'd ever triggered. Oh, relax, Inko said cheerfully as he bolted toward the door. She thought your curly hair was adorable. And she loved the one where you're covered in mud. I was 4. Inko's laughter followed him down the hallway. Have a good first day, sweetheart. Don't forget your lunch. Izuku slammed the door behind him and stood there for a second, forehead resting against the wood as he tried and failed to calm down. This, he thought miserably, is what happens when your mom and your friend, girlfriend, whatever Mina is, become friends. His phone buzzed again in his hand. Mina, where are you? Izuku groaned, and then smiled. The embarrassment still buzzed through him, but it softened into something warmer as he lifted his hand and extended his palm. At the center of it, just beneath the skin, a tiny pinprick of violet light bloomed into existence. It pulsed once, twice slow and controlled as he focused his breathing. The veins along his fingers and forearm brightened in response, thin glowing threads weaving together like a living circuit. The air in front of his palm began to distort, space warping inward as if reality itself were being gently folded. With a soft, humming thrum, a small sphere of antimatter slipped free from his hand. It floated for a fraction of a second, no larger than a marble, before rapidly expanding outward. The violet glow deepened, edges curling and spiraling until the sphere unraveled into a circular tear in space. The portal stabilized with a faint ripple, its surface swirling like liquid starlight, reflecting fractured images of the street beyond. Izuku waited just long enough to be sure it wouldn't collapse, then stepped forward. The sensation of passing through never stopped being strange. There was no pressure, no heat, just a brief moment of weightlessness, like falling sideways through a dream. And then, he emerged behind Mina Ishido. The portal snapped shut silently behind him, the warped air smoothing itself out as if nothing had happened. Mina stood a few feet away near the station entrance, one foot bouncing impatiently as she leaned over her phone. Her horns curved neatly through her pink hair, which caught the morning light, messing with her skirt as she scrolled. A grin tugged at her lips, probably mid-text, judging by how fast her thumbs were moving. Completely oblivious. Izuku's smirk grew. He stepped closer, careful not to make a sound, the glow in his veins dimming as he relaxed his quirk. Then, in one smooth motion, he slipped an arm around her shoulders and gently hooked it around her neck, not tight, just enough to startle. Who you waiting for, Pinky? Mina shrieked. What is you? Her phone nearly went flying as she flailed, eyes widening in shock. She spun in his grip, eyes wide for half a second before recognition kicked in. Then she laughed. Oh my God, she said, punching his arm lightly as she twisted free. I was literally texting you. Izuku laughed too, the sound easier than it had been all morning. I figured. She stared at him for a moment longer, eyes flicking over the faint glow still lingering in his veins, then down at his uniform, perfectly straight despite everything. You ported, didn't you? She said, grin spreading slow and knowing. Izuku rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly a little sheepish. Maybe. Mina's grin turned feral. That's so unfair. I wait like a normal person and you just pop out of space behind me. Hey, he said, smiling back at her, first day of you had to make an entrance. She laughed again, looping an arm around his and leaning in as they headed toward the station together. Yeah, just don't scare me like that again. Izuku glanced down at her, eyes glowing softly. No promises, Izuku said with a soft smirk, reaching out to ruffle Mina's fluffy pink hair. She squeaked in protest, but the way her yellow eyes crinkled at the corners betrayed her delight at the gesture. The morning train pulled into the station with a gentle hiss of brakes, right on schedule. The early spring air was crisp, carrying the scent of cherry blossoms from the trees that lined the station platform. Before Izuku could take 2 steps toward the train, Mina had already latched onto his arm, pressing close against his side with the casual affection that had become normal between them over the past 2 weeks. Her touch made his antimatter glands pulse warmly beneath his skin, creating subtle patterns of purple light that reflected off the train's windows like miniature auroras. "You know," she said as they boarded together, finding a spot near the back where the morning sun streamed through the windows, "your quirk gives you away every time. You can act cool all you want, but those pretty light shows tell me exactly how flustered you get." Izuku shot her a playful glare, but didn't try to deny it or pull his arm free. The morning commuters around them tried to be subtle about their curious glances. It wasn't every day you saw 2 such obviously mutant-type students so comfortable with each other. Says the girl who turns 3 shades darker pink whenever I call her Pinky. Right on cue, Mina's cheeks darkened, and she buried her face against his shoulder with a groan. "That's different." Her voice was muffled by his uniform jacket, but he could feel her smile against his arm. As the train pulled away from the station, carrying them toward their first day at U, Izuku found himself marveling at how comfortable this had become, the teasing, casual touches, the way they naturally gravitated toward each other. His past self would never have believed this possible. Just months ago, he'd been the quirkless kid who could barely speak to anyone, let alone hold a conversation with a girl. Their reflections in the window caught his eye, the girl with pink skin and horns, and the boy with cosmic light flowing through his veins. They made quite the pair. The morning sunlight caught Mina's horns just right, making them gleam like polished ivory against her pink skin. She'd styled her hair differently today, he noticed, still wild and fluffy, but with small clips holding back the sides in a way that framed her face perfectly. "You're staring," Mina teased, catching his eye in the reflection. "See something you like?" A few weeks ago, that comment would have reduced him to a stammering mess. Now, he just smiled, letting his quirks glow brighten slightly. "Maybe I do." Mina's face flushed darker again, but her grip on his arm tightened affectionately. "Smooth talker. When did you get so confident, huh?" "Probably around the same time a certain acid-wielding hero student decided to ask me out for smoothies," he replied, watching the cityscape scroll past outside. The familiar buildings were gradually giving way to the districts closer to UA, where hero agencies and support companies dominated the skyline. "Best decision I ever made," Mina hummed contentedly. Then, after a pause, "Though Mom still thinks I'm crazy for getting smoothies with the guy who erased a giant robot from existence." Izuku chuckled softly. "At least your mom's taking it well. Mine's already planning our wedding. Did you know she started a photo album just for us?" "Oh, I know," Mina grinned mischievously. "She sends me updates. That picture of baby you in the All Might onesie is my new phone background." "It's what?" Izuku's veins flared brighter in embarrassment, making several nearby passengers jump. A small child across the aisle pointed excitedly at the purple light show, only to be gently shushed by his mother. Mina dissolved into giggles, pressing her face into his shoulder to muffle the sound. "I'm kidding. But oh man, your face. And look at those pretty lights." She poked one of his glowing veins playfully. "You make it too easy, hot stuff." Izuku shook his head, but he was smiling. The nickname that had once flustered him so badly had become a term of endearment, something that was uniquely theirs. "You're impossible, you know that?" "But you like it," she replied with absolute certainty. Then, more softly, "I'm really glad we're in the same class. I don't know if I could handle all this," she gestured vaguely at the UA uniform she wore, "without you there." The honesty in her voice made his chest tighten. He shifted his arms slightly, just enough to take her hand properly, their fingers intertwining naturally. "Same here. Though I'm pretty sure Kaken would say we're being gross right now." "Speaking of our explosive friend, is he meeting us there?" "Yeah, he texted earlier. Said something about not wanting to third wheel on our Dimon romance novel commute." Izuku's impression of Katsuki's gruff tone was almost perfect, making Mina snort with laughter. The train began to slow as it approached their stop. Through the windows, they could see UA's main building rising above the city like a beacon. Other students in the same uniform were already streaming toward the gates, some looking confident, others nervous, all of them carrying the same sense of anticipation. "Ready?" Mina asked, squeezing his hand as they stood. Izuku looked down at their joined hands, pink skin against his own, her fingers fitting perfectly between his despite the small holes in his palms where antimatter occasionally leaked through. Then he looked at their destination, the school he'd dreamed of attending since he was a child. "Yeah," he said softly. "I'm ready." The walk from the station to UA was filled with a strange mixture of excitement and nervous energy. Cherry blossom petals drifted lazily through the air, some catching in Mina's hair like tiny pink stars against her darker pink skin. Izuku found himself occasionally reaching over to brush them away, each casual touch making her smile grow wider. "You know," Mina said as they turned onto the main road leading to UA, still holding his hand, "a few months ago, if someone told me I'd be walking to UA with the highest scoring student in entrance exam history, I'd have called them crazy." She bumped her shoulder against his playfully. "Let alone that said student would be this cute guy with galaxy powers who keeps playing with my hair." Izuku's veins pulsed with embarrassment, but his smile was genuine. "And if someone told me I'd be walking with the most beautiful girl in our year, who somehow isn't terrified of my reality-breaking quirk." He let the sentence trail off as Mina's face darkened several shades. "Most beautiful? That's a bold claim, Mr. Midoriya," she managed to say, though her flustered state was obvious. "You haven't even met all our classmates yet." "Don't need to," he replied with a confidence that still surprised him sometimes. The past 2 weeks of constant texting, casual dates, and training together had done wonders for his ability to actually express his feelings. But save the F-romance novel sheet for after school. The familiar explosive voice made them both turn. Katsuki was leaning against UA's main gate, his uniform tie already hanging loose despite it being the first day. His usual scowl was firmly in place, but there was an amused glint in his eyes. "Good morning to you too, Kaken," Izuku called back, making no move to release Mina's hand as they approached. "Thought you were going to be late." "Unlike you two losers, I don't need to make a dramatic entrance holding hands and sheet." Katsuki fell into step beside them as they passed through the gate. "Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't get distracted and walk into a wall while making googly eyes at raccoon eyes." Mina giggled, her free hand coming up to cover her mouth. "Ah, you do care." "Don't worry, Explosion Boy, we'll try to keep the PDA to a minimum." "Says the girl who hasn't let go of my arm all morning," Izuku pointed out dryly. "That's different." Mina protested for the second time that day. "Your arm is comfortable. And warm. And all glowy." Katsuki made an exaggerated gagging noise. "I'm gonna effing puke. Is this what I have to deal with all year? You two being all," he waved his hand vaguely, small. Explosions popping between his fingers, domestic and sheet? Other students were starting to stare now, some recognizing them from the entrance exam. Whispers followed in their wake, mentions of antimatter guy, and that pink girl who melts things, and isn't that the explosion kid? But none of them paid it any mind. This was their moment, the beginning of something they'd all dreamed of. The main building loomed before them, its H-shaped architecture somehow both imposing and welcoming. Sunlight glinted off the countless windows, making the whole structure seem to gleam. Through the glass, they could see other students already making their way to their classrooms, some looking lost, others moving with purpose. "Class 1A should be on the first floor," Izuku said, naturally falling into his analytical mode. The hero course classrooms are always positioned for easy access to the training grounds, and considering the structural layout of the building dash. "Nerd," Katsuki interrupted, but there was no real bite to it. If anything, he seemed relieved that some things hadn't changed, even with Izuku's new quirk and growing confidence. The familiar dynamic was comforting, even if everything else had shifted. "My nerd though," Mina said with a proud grin, hugging Izuku's arm tighter as his veins flared brighter beneath his skin. Katsuki made an exaggerated gagging noise, complete with mock-retching motions that drew stares from passing students. Izuku's eyes glinted with mischief, a smirk playing at his lips as he looked down at Mina. "Claiming me already? Never knew you were so bold, Pinky." His tone was teasing, but there was a warmth to it that made Mina's heart skip. The effect was immediate. Mina's pink complexion darkened dramatically, the color spreading all the way to the tips of her horns. She opened and closed her mouth several times, trying to form words but finding none. It was rare for someone to outfluster her, but Izuku had been getting better at it lately. "Get a room, you two!" Katsuki snapped, throwing his hands up in exasperation. Small explosions popped from his palms, reflecting his irritation. "I didn't sign up to watch this romantic comedy bullshit all year." But Mina, never one to back down from a challenge, recovered quickly. Her yellow and black eyes glinted with dangerous amusement as she looked at Katsuki. A devilish grin spread across her face, one that made Izuku immediately nervous. "You telling us to boom boom boy?" she asked innocently, tilting her head. The crude words in her sweet tone created such a contrast that several nearby students stopped in their tracks. Izuku's eyes went wide, his veins flaring so bright they were almost white. "Mina!" He quickly clapped a hand over her mouth, feeling her grin against his palm. "Okay, that's enough out of you, Pinky." His voice had jumped at least an octave higher. Katsuki stood frozen, his mouth hanging open in shock. For perhaps the first time in his life, the explosive boy was completely speechless. A few small pops came from his palms, like misfiring circuits, as his brain tried to process what he'd just heard. Mina's shoulders shook with suppressed laughter under Izuku's hand, her eyes dancing with mirth. When she liked his palm playfully, he yanked it away with a yelp, wiping it on his uniform pants while she dissolved into giggles. "You!" Katsuki finally managed, his voice strangled. "What the actual raccoon eyes?" "Your face." Mina wheezed, clutching her stomach as she laughed. "Oh my god, your face. I didn't think anything could shut you up, but that did it." Izuku pinched the bridge of his nose, though he couldn't quite hide his own smile. "I can't take you anywhere," he muttered fondly, his antimatter glands still pulsing with embarrassed light. "Nope." Mina agreed cheerfully, latching back onto his arm. "You're stuck with me now, hot stuff. Better get used to it." "I'm going to class," Katsuki announced abruptly, still looking shell-shocked. "Before you two corrupt what's left of my effing sanity." He started walking ahead, then paused and pointed at Mina. "You're effing dangerous, raccoon eyes." "I respect that, but holy shit." Mina beamed at him like this was the highest compliment she'd ever received. "Thanks, boom boom boy. Love you too." Katsuki made a sound like a strangled cat and quickened his pace, leaving Izuku and Mina behind. Other students gave them a wide berth, probably wondering what kind of chaos they'd just witnessed. "You're terrible," Izuku told Mina, but he was grinning now too. "Absolutely terrible." "Yeah," she agreed, standing on her tiptoes to kiss his cheek. "But I'm your terrible." The halls of UA were a maze of modern architecture and gleaming surfaces, every window and polished floor reflecting the morning sunlight. Their footsteps echoed off the high ceilings as they followed the signs toward Class 1A, Katsuki still walking ahead of them like he was trying to put distance between himself and Mina's chaos. "You really broke him, you know," Izuku said, watching Katsuki's retreating back. His childhood friend kept glancing over his shoulder at them, as if expecting Mina to say something else outrageous. "I don't think anyone's ever left him speechless before." Mina hummed proudly, her arms still comfortably linked with his. "Someone had to do it. Besides," she grinned up at him, "did you see how red his face got? Almost as red as when you spiked his udon with that chemical X hot sauce." "I still feel bad about that," Izuku admitted, his free hand coming up to rub the back of his neck. His antimatter glands pulsed softly beneath his skin, casting gentle purple light on the walls as they walked, drawing curious looks from other students. "Thought he could handle it. He likes spicy food." "Class 1A, Katsuki called back suddenly, having reached a massive door emblazoned with the class designation. "Holy shit, this thing is huge." The door towered over them, easily 3 times Izuku's height. It was clearly designed to accommodate students with size-altering quirks, but the scale was still impressive. As they approached, Izuku could hear voices from inside, their future classmates, already arriving. "Ready to make our grand entrance?" Mina asked, bouncing slightly on her toes with excitement. The highest scorer in UA history, the Explosion King and the Acid Queen. She struck a dramatic pose, making Izuku's veins pulse with amusement. Acid Queen? He raised an eyebrow, his purple and black eyes glinting. When did you come up with that one? Just now, she admitted. But it sounds cool, right? Plus, if you're going to be UA's golden boy with your fancy antimatter powers, I need a good title too. Katsuki snorted from where he stood by the door, small explosions crackling in his palms. You two are so FNG extra. Can we go in now, or do you need to practice your dramatic poses some more? Says the guy who literally explodes things to say hello. Mina shot back, sticking out her tongue. A few drops of acid dripped from her fingers, sizzling harmlessly on the floor. Don't act like you're not just as dramatic, boom boom boy. Call me that one more time, I dare you dash. Children, Izuku interrupted, his voice carrying that new confidence that still sometimes surprised them. A small distortion in the air around his hand emphasized his point. Maybe we should actually enter the classroom before starting another chaos session? Both Mina and Katsuki turned to look at him, then at each other. A silent agreement passed between them. They could continue their friendly bickering later. Right now, they had impressions to make. Fine, Katsuki grumbled, reaching for the door handle. But if anyone in there sees me off dash. You'll what? Blow me up. Mina teased, dancing away as Katsuki's hands sparked threateningly. I will literally blow up your desk. I'd like to see you try, Sparkler. Izuku watched them with fond exasperation, a small smirk on his face as he shook his head. These two had become such an important part of his life, Katsuki, redeeming himself through genuine friendship, and Mina, bringing light and laughter to everything she touched. The door slid open with a soft whoosh, revealing the classroom beyond. 20 desks arranged in neat rows, large windows letting in streams of morning light, and several students already inside, turning to see who had arrived. This was it, the real beginning of their hero journey. After you, my queen, Izuku said to Mina with an exaggerated bow, making her giggle and Katsuki mime gagging again. Such a gentleman, she replied, pulling him through the doorway with her. The classroom was already half full when they entered, conversations pausing briefly as heads turned to observe the newcomers. Izuku was acutely aware of how they must look, his glowing veins casting purple light across the floor, Mina's vibrant pink presence, and Katsuki's perpetual scowl bringing up the rear. There's a cluster of empty seats in the back, Mina pointed out, already tugging Izuku in that direction. 3 desks, perfectly aligned, as if waiting for them. Perfect! They had barely settled in, Izuku by the window, Mina in the middle, and Katsuki on the aisle, when a tall boy with glasses approached their cluster with robotic movements. His hands chopped through the air as he spoke, matching his oddly formal cadence. Greetings! I am Tenya Ida from Semi-Private Academy. I couldn't help but notice your rather NTMT display in the hallway. His eyes darted between Izuku and Mina, then to their still-linked hands. While I understand the excitement of youth, perhaps such behavior should be reserved for dash. Oi, Four Eyes, Katsuki interrupted, already looking annoyed. You always this much of a stick in the mud, or is this a special occasion? Ida's mouth dropped open in shock. That is, such language as dash. Kaken, be nice, Izuku sighed, though his veins pulsed with amusement. He turned to Ida with an apologetic smile. I'm Izuku Midoriya. This is Mina Ishido, and the explosion waiting to happen is Katsuki Bakugo. Midoriya? Ida's eyes widened in recognition. The one who scored highest in the entrance exam? Your display of power was most impressive, though perhaps a bit excessive in terms of property damage. Mina giggled. That's my hot stuff. Erasing giant robots with style. Hot stuff. Ida looked increasingly flustered by their dynamic. His hands moved faster through the air as his confusion mounted. Is this appropriate classroom behavior? Should there not be more professional distance between dash? Dude, a red-haired boy called from across the room, grinning sharply. Let them live. Besides, did you see the video? That quirk was manly as hell. More students began joining the conversation, the initial tension breaking. A girl with earphone jacks hanging from her earlobes leaned over her desk. Are those veins actually glowing, or is it some kind of reflection? They're real, Izuku confirmed, holding up his arm to demonstrate. The purple light beneath his skin pulsed gently. Side effect of the quirk. That's so cool, the red-haired boy bounded over. I'm Kirishima. Your quirk is way more flashy than mine, I just get hard. There was a beat of silence. Phrasing. Mina burst out laughing, while Katsuki made a choking sound and Ida looked ready to faint. Wait, no, I meant dash. Kirishima's face matched his hair as he tried to backtrack. I meant my skin hardens. Kirishima clarified quickly, waving his hands. Like this. He activated his quirk, his skin taking on a jagged, crystalline appearance. See? Totally different. Sure it is, Mr. I like to get hard, Mina teased, her yellow eyes sparkling with mischief. Whatever helps you sleep at night. I give up. Kirishima lowered his head in defeat, hardening forgotten. A girl with long black hair tied in a spiky ponytail approached their cluster, her movements graceful and measured. Momo Yayorozu, she introduced herself with a slight bow. I believe we took second place in the entrance exam? Oh yeah. Mina brightened. Creation quirk, right? Katsuki mentioned you got like 150 points. 151, to be precise, Yayorozu nodded. Though it pales in comparison to Midoriya's score. I must admit, I'm quite curious about the theoretical applications of antimatter manipulation. Great, Katsuki groaned, another Ivanyi nerd. Ida, who had been silently processing everything, suddenly snapped back to attention. Language. And proper seating posture. And dash. Does he ever stop? A floating set of clothes whispered loudly. Apparently not, the earphone jack girl replied. I'm Kyokujire, by the way. The floating uniform is Hagakure. Hi. The uniform waved enthusiastically. Your eyes are so pretty. Both of you. She gestured between Izuku and Mina. The whole black Scara thing is super cool. Izuku felt his veins brighten at the compliment, while Mina beamed. Right? We match. It was totally meant to be. If you extras are done with the meet and greet, Katsuki cut in, anyone want to explain why there's a Fangy bird in a uniform staring at us? All heads turned to see a student with the head of a black bird, who had indeed been quietly observing their group. He bowed slightly when noticed. Fumikage Tokoyami. I was merely appreciating the darkness within your souls. A beat of silence. I like him, Mina declared. He can be Raven Boy. Please do not. Fumikage said in response. Too late. Mina chirped. The cheerful atmosphere of introductions shattered instantly as a low, tired voice cut through the chatter. Students who had been chatting animatedly just moments before froze mid-sentence, heads whipping toward the front of the classroom. There, emerging from what appeared to be a neon yellow sleeping bag like some kind of disheveled caterpillar, was a man who looked like he hadn't slept in years. His long black hair hung in messy strands around a face marked by stubble and exhaustion, his eyes carrying the dead look of someone who had long since run out of patience. If you're only here to make friends, he drawled, fixing them with a gaze that made even Katsuki tense slightly, then you can pack your stuff and leave. We do not have time for useless matters. Izuku felt Mina's grip on his arm tighten slightly. His antimatter glands pulsed with nervous energy as he studied their apparent teacher. There was something dangerous about him, something that set off every instinct honed from years of analyzing pro-heroes. The man took a long, deliberate sip from a juice box that seemed comically out of place in his hand. This is the hero course, he continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority despite its tired tone. Go somewhere else if you want to play at being friends. The sleeping bag slid to the floor as he stood, revealing a black outfit that seemed to consist entirely of what looked like capture scarves. I'm Shota Aizawa. I will be your homeroom teacher. Nice to meet you. The last part was delivered with such complete lack of enthusiasm that several students exchanged uncertain glances. Without warning, he hefted a large box onto his desk. The sound of it hitting the wooden surface made several students jump. "Grab one of these and meet me outside." He gestured to what appeared to be P uniforms, each neatly folded with UA's logo visible. No one moved for a moment, the sudden shift from casual introductions to whatever this was leaving them all slightly stunned. "Now," Aizawa added, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Unless you'd prefer to leave." The class burst into motion, students hurrying to comply. As Izuku stood, he couldn't shake the feeling that their real test was just beginning. A round-faced girl with brown hair raised her hand hesitantly. Sir? What about the orientation ceremony? And the guidance sessions?" Aizawa's eyes somehow managed to look even more dead inside as he regarded her. "Ochako Uraraka, correct?" His tone suggested he couldn't care less about her name. "If you plan to become a pro hero, you can't waste time on pointless ceremonies." He turned his gaze to sweep across the entire class. "Here at UA, teachers are given a great deal of freedom in how we run our courses. That means..." A hint of something almost predatory entered his expression. "I get to decide what's worth your time." Izuku stood up with nervous energy. Beside him, Mina squeezed his hand reassuringly, while Katsuki let out a small teeth of interest. "You have exactly 5 minutes to change and meet me at Training Ground Beta," Aizawa continued, already heading for the door. "Anyone who's late can consider themselves expelled." The class erupted into panicked motion. Izuku caught snippets of worried conversation as they rushed to grab uniforms. "Is he serious? He can't actually expel us, right? On the first day? Welcome to, I guess," Mina whispered to Izuku as they hurried down the hall, uniforms clutched in their arms. "Think he's bluffing?" Izuku's purple eyes glowed thoughtfully. "Somehow. I don't think he is." The class split into 2 groups at the changing rooms, though Mina lingered for a moment before reluctantly releasing Izuku's arm. "See you out there, hot stuff," she called, earning several curious looks from their female classmates. In the girls' changing room, Mina had barely opened her locker when the questions started. "Okay, spill," the invisible girl, Hagakure, bounced excitedly. "What's the deal with you and purple-haired boy? You two are way too comfortable for people who just met." Mina grinned as she pulled off her uniform jacket. "We met at the entrance exam. He saved like half the examinees from the zero-pointer. It was amazing. Then we got smoothies after." "Just smoothies?" Jairu raised an eyebrow, her earphone jacks twirling teasingly. "Because that hand-holding looked pretty established." "His quirk is rather fascinating," Yaoyorozu added as she neatly folded her skirt. "The molecular implications alone dash. And he's cute." Hagakure interrupted. "Even with the whole glowy veins thing. Actually, especially with the glowy veins thing." Mina's pink skin darkened slightly. "He is pretty cute, isn't he?" she agreed, unable to keep the fondness from her voice. Meanwhile, in the boys' changing room, a very different scene was unfolding. Izuku had just pulled his PE shirt on when he noticed movement near the back wall. A small boy with purple ball for hair was pressing against the wall, giggling quietly. "There's a peephole here," Mineta whispered excitedly. "We can see right into the girls' room." Izuku's veins darkened momentarily, his voice dropping low. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Mineta turned, sneering when he saw who had spoken. "What's it to you, freak? Just because you got lucky with Pink Girl doesn't mean you can dash." The word, freak, had barely left his mouth when a sphere of antimatter the size of a marble shot past his head, striking the locker beside him. The metal imploded with a sound like a gunshot, leaving a perfect spherical void in its wake. Several boys jumped at the noise, turning to see Izuku's eyes glowing dangerously bright, his palms still raised. "Want to rethink that?" Izuku asked quietly. The air around him distorted slightly, reality bending inward as his antimatter glands pulsed with barely contained power. "Next one goes through you. And unlike the locker, you'll feel it happening." Katsuki smirked as Izuku confronted the purple midget, a part of him secretly proud. Mineta stumbled backward, face pale. "Why you can't? That's assault." "So is Visum," Izuku replied coldly. "And I don't think anyone here would blame me for protecting their classmates' privacy. Right?" Several of the boys nodded firmly. Kirishima's grin had turned sharp, his quirk activated. Demon right. That was super unmanly, dude. Besides, Katsuki added with a vicious smirk, accidents happen during quirk training. All the time. Mineta looked between them, then at the hole in the locker where solid metal had simply ceased to exist, and promptly fled to the opposite side of the room. Didn't think you had that in you, Deku, Katsuki said quietly as they finished changing. Izuku's eyes were still glowing, but his voice was steady. Some things are worth protecting. Like Raccoon Eye's honor? Like all of their privacy, Izuku corrected, though his veins pulsed slightly brighter at the mention of Mina. Now come on. We've got 2 minutes before Aizawa-sensei expels us. As they hurried toward training ground Beta, Izuku maintained a firm grip on the back of Mineta's P uniform, practically carrying the smaller boy who had given up struggling after another warning pulse of antimatter nearby. The rest of the class walked in loose groups, with frequent glances toward the strange procession. Put me down. Mineta whined, feet dangling. I said I was sorry. No, you didn't actually, Izuku replied calmly, his eyes still glowing with residual anger. You just ran away. There's a difference. They reached the training ground with 30 seconds to spare. Aizawa stood waiting, his tired eyes narrowing slightly at the sight of Izuku carrying a struggling Mineta. Explain, he drawled, somehow making the single word sound both bored and threatening. Izuku set Mineta down but kept a hand firmly on his shoulder. The purple-haired boy tried to edge away but froze when Izuku's veins pulsed warningly. Sir, Izuku began formally, I caught Mineta attempting to use a peephole to spy on the girls while they were changing. When confronted, he responded with discriminatory language and refused to stop his behavior. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees as Aizawa's eyes fixed on Mineta. The capture weapon around his neck shifted slightly, as if responding to his mood. Is this true? Mineta's attempt at denial died in his throat as several male students stepped forward to confirm Izuku's account. Aizawa's expression didn't change, but something dangerous entered his voice. Minor Mineta, he said, pulling out his phone while keeping his eyes locked on the increasingly pale student. You are hereby expelled from UA High School, effective immediately. His fingers moved across the screen with practiced efficiency. Furthermore, I'm recommending you be blacklisted from all hero courses in Japan. SXL harassment and Vivasm have no place in the hero industry. He pressed send on what appeared to be a message to Principal Nizu, then turned his attention back to the shell-shocked Mineta. Security will escort you off campus. Leave your uniform. As if on cue, 2 UA security officers appeared at the edge of the training ground. Mineta, finally seeming to realize the gravity of his situation, burst into tears as they led him away. A moment of heavy silence fell over the class. Then, to Izuku's surprise, Jairu approached him with a small smile. Thanks for that, she said, her earphone jacks twirling thoughtfully. We heard everything through the wall. Well, I heard and filled everyone in. Izuku blinked, his veins pulsing with mild embarrassment. Heard. These aren't just for show. She tapped one jack against her ear. The whole, next one goes through you, thing was pretty intense. Didn't know you had it in you, Midoriya. The other girls gathered around, each expressing their gratitude in their own way. Yaoyorozu offered a formal bow, Uraraka gave him an enthusiastic thumbs up, and Hagakure. Well, her uniform suggested she was bouncing excitedly. Mina, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly launched herself at him. Her arms wrapped around his neck as she pressed a firm kiss to his cheek, causing his antimatter glands to flare brilliantly. My hero, she sang teasingly, though there was genuine appreciation in her eyes. If you're quite finished, Aizawa's dry voice cut through the moment, we have a quirk assessment test to begin. And Midoriya? Izuku turned, still slightly flustered from Mina's display. Yes, sir? Good job. Though next time, try not to destroy school property while making your point. Katsuki's explosive laughter echoed across the training ground. First up, the softball throw, Aizawa announced, holding up a white ball. Uraraka, you managed to score well with this in the entrance exam. Step up. while Uraraka demonstrated her zero-gravity quirk, sending the ball into what appeared to be infinity. Izuku felt his antimatter glands warming beneath his skin. He closed his eyes, focusing on the familiar sensation of power flowing through his specialized veins. The other students were still watching Uraraka's display in awe, unaware of what his quirk could do. Infinity! Several students gasped at Uraraka's score. Mina nudged Izuku gently, noticing his concentration. Planning something flashy? She whispered, familiar enough with his quirk to recognize when he was preparing something big. Maybe, he murmured back, feeling the antimatter pool in his veins. Though I should probably hold back. Don't want to cause another incident. Katsuki, overhearing, snorted. Yeah, one erased baseball field was enough. Midoriya, Aizawa called, interrupting their whispered conversation. You're up. The class's attention shifted to him, curious murmurs rising. Most had seen glimpses of his glowing veins and altered appearance, but none except Mina and Katsuki had seen his quirk in action outside of brief moments in the entrance exam. Think that's some kind of strength enhancement quirk? Those veins look weird though. Maybe it's energy-based? Izuku stepped into the circle, ignoring the speculation. He could feel his classmates' eyes on him, studying his glowing veins and the way his eyes pulsed with violet light. He took a deep breath, carefully directing the flow of antimatter into his throwing arm. The glands beneath his skin brightened noticeably, drawing more curious whispers. Be careful with that problem, child, Aizawa warned, his tired eyes showing a hint of interest. He, at least, knew exactly what Izuku's quirk could do. Izuku nodded, drew his arm back, and threw. The ball left his hand trailing faint purple light, the air around it distorting slightly as reality bent to accommodate the antimatter-enhanced force. It shot skyward like a comet, leaving the class in stunned silence. Aizawa's device beeped, 897.3 meters. The silence broke into a cascade of excited questions. What kind of quirk was that? Did you see the air warp? How did he make it glow? Izuku just smiled, flexing his fingers as he watched the antimatter settle back into its normal flow. He caught Mina's proud grin and Katsuki's approving nod. They knew he'd held back significantly, no need to reveal everything on the first day. Next, Aizawa called, cutting off the questions before they could start. Ashido. The 50-meter dash came next, and the atmosphere in the stadium shifted. The crowd of students and teachers leaned in, eager to see raw speed in action. Pairs of students lined up, each quirk on display. Izuku watched carefully, analyzing every movement. Ida's engine revved, his legs a blur, and he shot down the track in an impressive 3.04 seconds. Ajui's frog form let her spring off the line in smooth, powerful leaps, almost gliding across the track with each bound. Yaoyorozu, ever resourceful, had quickly fashioned a compact scooter out of her materials, and she zipped forward with precise control, her ingenuity evident in every calculated push. When the crowd's attention swung back to him, Izuku felt the familiar thrill of anticipation. Midoriya, Ashido, Aizawa's monotone voice called. The students froze mid-conversation as he gestured toward the starting line. Mina slid into position next to him, her grin wide and teasing. Don't hold back too much, hot stuff. I want to see some jaws drop. Izuku's lips quirked in amusement. No promises, Pinky. The students crowded closer, whispers buzzing like static in his ears. Think he'll do the glowy thing again? Maybe it's some kind of energy boost? Those veins look brighter. Izuku closed his eyes, feeling the familiar warmth ignite in his core as the antimatter glands activated. Unlike before, he didn't direct the flow outward. This time, he absorbed it, drawing the energy inward, concentrating it deep inside himself. His veins darkened, the familiar purples and blues giving way to a deep, unnatural black, snaking across his skin like rivers of ink. The air seemed to tremble around him, almost reacting to the buildup. Ready, Aizawa intoned, his capture weapon shifting subtly, sensing the spike in ambient energy. Set. Mina's eyes glimmered with mischief, her acid-coated feet braced to launch, fully aware of the storm that was about to hit. Go! Then everything changed. For the others, It happened in a blink, an instantaneous flash of purple light that distorted the very air, a barely perceptible warping of reality, and suddenly Izuku was across the finish line. The measuring robot blinked, struggled, and then displayed a series of garbled errors as if the technology itself couldn't compute what had happened. But for Izuku, the experience was something else entirely. In that fraction of a second when he had surpassed light speed, time itself felt malleable. The world stretched and froze. His classmates were suspended mid-motion, hair lifting as though caught in a frozen breeze, shoes hovering millimeters above the track. Dust motes glittered in the still sunlight, frozen in place. Light itself seemed to pause, bending slightly at the edges of his vision. He felt the familiar vertigo of existing between moments, a strange, exhilarating emptiness where nothing moved but him. He took his steps with precision, careful not to overextend and damage the track beneath him. Each movement left a faint shimmer in the air, a distortion that lingered briefly before snapping back. Then, almost reluctantly, he let the antimatter recede, the black veins fading to normal, leaving only subtle patterns pulsating beneath his skin as his body settled from the burst. Reality rushed back in. The world snapped forward like a broken tape being rewound too fast. "What the hell was that?" someone shouted, voice cracking under a mix of shock and awe. Did he teleport? "No, I saw him move, it was just..." "How fast was that?" Mina crossed the finish line moments later, sliding smoothly to a stop in 5.2 seconds. She laughed, brushing imaginary dust off her acid-slicked feet and poking him in the arm. "Show off," she teased. Katsuki's voice cut through the murmuring crowd, filled with a mix of disbelief and irritation. "Holy shit, Deku. Thought you were gonna hold back?" Izuku shrugged, trying to seem casual, though his veins still pulsed with faint purple light. "I did. I could have taken more steps." Steps? Ida's voice wavered slightly, his own speed-based quirk suddenly feeling laughably slow in comparison. The mechanics of his engine now seemed almost painfully finite. Aizawa's tired, sharp voice interrupted the murmurs before anyone could spiral into wild speculation. "Next pair, line up. We don't have all day to stand around gawking." As Izuku walked back toward the group, he could hear snippets of whispered theories. Some kind of time manipulation maybe? But what's with the purple light? And those black veins when he started? Mina slipped her hand into his, her touch grounding him amidst the adrenaline still buzzing through his veins. Her fingers were warm, electric in their own way. "Good," he murmured softly, feeling the pulse of antimatter respond to her presence. "Keeps things interesting." She grinned knowingly, squeezing his hand. "Definitely." "All right," Aizawa announced, holding up his phone. The holographic display materialized before them, showing all 19 scores after Mineta's expulsion. Izuku Midoriya, Momo Yaoyorozu, Katsuki Bakugo, Shoto Todoroki, Tenya Ida, Fumikage Tokoyami, Mina Ishido, Mizo Shoji, Mashireo Ojiro, Ijiro Kirishima, Tsuyu Azui, Buchako Uraraka, Kyokager, Denki Kaminari, Yuga Oyama, Antasiro, Toru Hagakure, Koji Koda, Rikido Sato. "As you can see," Aizawa continued, his voice carrying its usual exhausted tone, "Midoriya demonstrated exceptional control and versatility. Something to think about." His eyes swept over the class. "Oh, and I lied about expelling someone. That was a logical ruse to draw out your full potential." "What?" several students shouted, while others just slumped in relief. "Although," he added with a slight smirk, "Mineta's expulsion stands. SXL harassment is never a logical ruse." He turned toward the building, his capture weapon shifting with the movement. "Your curriculum guides are on your desks inside. Review them before your afternoon classes." "Dismissed." They walked back, Mina hanging onto Izuku's arm while Katsuki trailed behind making gagging noises. Their classmates continued to steal curious glances. "You're going to have to tell them eventually," Mina pointed out, poking one of his glowing veins. Izuku smiled, watching the purple light dance beneath his skin. "Eventually," he agreed. "But for now, you're enjoying watching them lose their minds trying to figure it out. Katsuki finished with a knowing smirk. Maybe a little.